This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never been the type to believe in the paranormal. Ghosts, spirits, demons, I always thought they were just stories to scare kids or explanations people made up when they couldn't understand something. But what happened that night at Lily's house 5 years ago? I still can't explain it. I'm 19 now and I've tried to rationalize it countless times, but I can't shake the feeling that something truly unexplainable happened to us. It was summer break and I was 15, staying over at Lily's place in Eastwood. If you've never been to Eastwood, it's this tiny rural town where everyone knows everyone, and the closest movie theater is a 30-minute drive away. Lily's house was this old farmhouse at the edge of town, surrounded by cornfields and woods. During the day it was beautiful, all that open space and fresh air. But at night, the isolation felt different. We were having our usual sleepover routine, snacks, gossip, music, when Lily pulled out this crystal pendulum she'd bought at a new age shop in the city. It was a simple thing, just a clear quartz crystal hanging from a thin silver chain. She was super excited about it, going on about how it could answer yes or no questions based on which way it swung. Forward and back means yes, side to side means no, she explained, dangling it above her palm. I remember rolling my eyes. That's just your hand moving it, I told her. No, you have to try it, she insisted. It works better with 2 people anyway. I was skeptical but figured it was harmless. Just another silly thing to pass the time, like the Ouija board phase we'd gone through in 7th grade that had amounted to nothing but giggling and accusations of pushing the planchette. So we sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, facing each other. Lily held the chain between her thumb and forefinger, the crystal hanging perfectly still over a notebook we'd placed on the floor. She explained we needed to clear our minds and focus on the pendulum, asking it simple questions first to establish connection. "Is Sophia here with me?" Lily asked. After a moment, the crystal began to swing forward and back. "Yes." "Is today Friday?" The crystal swung side to side. "No." It was Saturday. I raised an eyebrow, still convinced she was moving it, but Lily looked genuinely surprised by the accuracy. We continued with basic questions, and oddly enough, it got them all right. We moved on to more personal stuff. "Will I get into NYU?" I asked, thinking about my dream school. The pendulum swung forward and back. "Yes." "Will Sophia date Ben Marshall this year?" Lily asked with a smirk. I blushed as the pendulum swung in a yes motion. Ben was my crush since forever, and weirdly enough, we did start dating that fall. It was fun, and I was getting into it despite myself. The answers seemed eerily accurate, and even though I was still sure there was a logical explanation, I felt a little thrill each time the crystal moved. Then Lily asked the question that changed everything. "Is this an evil spirit?" she asked with a laugh. The moment the words left her mouth, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air felt heavier somehow. The pendulum didn't move at first, and then it started to swing in a circular motion, something Lily hadn't mentioned as a possible response. Suddenly, Lily flinched and her hand jerked, almost dropping the pendulum. Her free hand flew up to her eye. "Ow, something's in my eye," she said, tears immediately welling up. "Are you okay?" I asked, leaning forward. But the look on her face wasn't just pain, it was panic, pure unfiltered fear. Her face had gone pale and she was blinking rapidly, her hand still pressed against her eye. "What's wrong?" I asked again. I don't know," she stammered. "It felt like something, I don't know how to explain it." We decided to take a break. Lily put the pendulum away in her drawer and we went to the kitchen to get some snacks. We tried to lighten the mood, playing music on her phone and making up silly raps as we sat on the kitchen floor with chips and soda. That's when I saw it. I was mid-laugh when I glanced up toward the hallway. A dark shadow slid behind the corner wall next to the door. Not walked, slid, like a cutout being pulled across a surface. My laughter died in my throat. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Lily looked up, confused. "See what?" I couldn't answer. An overwhelming feeling of dread washed over me. The kitchen suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. I felt watched from all directions, the doorways, the windows, even the ceiling. My skin crawled with goosebumps and the hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. "We need to go upstairs," I said suddenly, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "What? Why?" Lily asked, still oblivious to my panic. I don't want to sleep in your room tonight," I said. We always slept in her downstairs bedroom during sleepovers. It was bigger, had its own bathroom, and was far from her parents' room, so we could stay up late without disturbing them. "But all our stuff is down here, and my room is comfy," Lily protested. Her resistance struck me as odd. Lily was usually easygoing, willing to change plans on a whim, but now she seemed strangely determined to stay downstairs. "Please," I insisted, the urgency in my voice increasing. "I just really don't want to be down here tonight." I felt an inexplicable need to be upstairs, where Lily's older brother Ryan's room was. I had never particularly cared about Ryan's presence before. He was 3 years older than us and mostly ignored us. But suddenly, I felt certain that whatever I had seen wouldn't follow us upstairs because of him. After more back and forth, Lily finally relented, though she seemed annoyed. We gathered our sleeping bags and headed upstairs to the spare bedroom next to Ryan's. The relief I felt when we reached the second floor was immediate and intense. It was like a weight had been lifted from my chest, allowing me to breathe freely again. The upstairs hallway was dimly lit by a small nightlight, but it felt infinitely safer than the well-lit kitchen we'd just left. "Feels better up here, right?" I asked Lily, hoping she felt it too. To my surprise, she nodded. "Yeah, actually, it does feel safer." She looked confused by her own admission. "That's weird. I was so set on staying downstairs, but now I'm glad we came up." Her reaction only made the whole situation more unsettling. Why had she been so resistant to coming upstairs if she also felt the danger below? We set up our sleeping bags on the floor of the spare room. I could hear faint music coming from Ryan's room next door, and the sound was incredibly comforting. As we settled in, I tried to make sense of what I was feeling. The presence I'd sensed downstairs had felt distinctly threatening, masculine, aggressive, looming. But up here, there was a different energy. It felt protective, almost maternal, like an elderly woman watching over us. I didn't share these thoughts with Lily. They sounded crazy even in my own head. We were quiet for a while, both of us scrolling through our phones, the earlier light-hearted mood completely gone. Then Lily did something that shocked me. She pulled out the crystal pendulum from her pocket. "I thought you left that downstairs," I said, my heart immediately starting to race. "I grabbed it when we were getting our stuff," she said casually. "I want to ask it one more thing." Before I could object, she was dangling it above her palm again. "Is there something negative in this house?" she asked. The pendulum swung forward and back. "Yes." "Is it downstairs?" "Yes." "Is it dangerous?" The crystal began to swing in that same circular motion we'd seen earlier. Then Lily asked something that sent ice through my veins. "Was it something we contacted with the pendulum?" "Yes." I made her put it away after that. We tried to sleep, but I lay awake for hours, listening to the house settle and creak. Every sound from downstairs made me tense up. I kept imagining that shadow figure sliding across walls, searching for us. Occasionally, I'd glance at Lily and find her staring wide-eyed at the ceiling too. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds, I felt like I'd survived something, though I couldn't articulate what. We didn't talk much about what had happened as we packed up my things. Lily seemed eager to act like everything was normal, and I was too freaked out to push the issue. As I was leaving, Ryan passed by in the hallway and nodded at me. "You guys were smart to sleep upstairs last night," he said casually. I froze. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "This house gets weird sometimes, especially downstairs." Then he walked away. like he hadn't just confirmed my worst fears. I never stayed overnight at Lily's house again. We drifted apart that year, as high school friends often do. The last I heard, her family had moved out of that house the following year, though no one ever said why. 5 years later, I still think about that night, about the shadow I saw, the oppressive feeling downstairs, and the protective presence upstairs, about why Lily suddenly couldn't explain what got in her eye right after that question, about Ryan's casual confirmation that something was wrong with that house, but most of all, I think about my instinct to seek protection near Lily's brother. How did I know? What part of me sensed that the masculine energy downstairs wouldn't follow us because of Ryan's presence? And what was that maternal energy I felt upstairs? I've never touched a pendulum since then. Some doors, once opened, can't be easily closed, and sometimes the answers we get aren't worth the questions we ask. Story 2: I've never told anyone this story besides my family and a couple of close friends, but it's been eating at me for 20 years now. I'm 38 years old, but I still think about what happened that summer afternoon when I was 8. Growing up in the backwoods of Maine, I was a pretty independent kid. My parents let me roam free during daylight hours, riding my bike, exploring the woods, normal kid stuff. I wasn't one of those kids afraid of the dark, though I knew better than to be outside after sunset. There were real dangers in our area: bears, coyotes, the occasional moose that could stomp you flat if startled. Our house was on this long, winding dead-end road with only a handful of other houses. My Uncle Pete's place about a mile down, and an older couple even further. The rest was just dense Maine forest, tall pines, maples, oaks, and undergrowth so thick in places you couldn't push through it. It was the summer of 1993, and that particular day was hot and humid, the kind where your t-shirt sticks to your back within minutes of being outside. I remember I'd spent the morning helping my dad stack firewood. Even in summer, we were always preparing for winter in Maine, and after lunch, I was antsy to get out and ride my bike. It was this beat-up Huffy with peeling blue paint that I'd gotten for Christmas the year before. Nothing special, but man, I loved that bike. "Be back before dinner," my mom called from the porch as I pedaled down our gravel driveway. I remember raising my hand to wave without looking back. The route I took that day was one I'd ridden dozens of times before. Once you got past our driveway, the main road stretched straight for about half a mile before a sharp curve, and then there was this narrow offshoot, more like a wide trail than a proper road, that I loved riding on. The ground was packed dirt with occasional patches of gravel, and there were never any cars, so I could really let loose and pedal as fast as I wanted. That day, I was flying down that trail, feeling the wind in my hair, that sense of freedom only a kid on a bike can really understand. The woods were thick on both sides, a solid wall of green with shafts of sunlight breaking through in places. It was probably around 3 in the afternoon, still plenty of daylight left. I'd been riding for maybe 15 minutes when something changed. It's hard to explain exactly, but the air felt different somehow. Heavier, like when a thunderstorm is about to roll in, but the sky was clear blue above the tree canopy. And then I got this feeling, this absolute certainty, that I was being watched. You know how sometimes you just know someone's looking at you? It was like that, but 100 times stronger. The hairs on my arms stood up, and without even thinking about it, I turned my head to look at the woods on my right. What I saw still gives me nightmares sometimes. About 20 yards into the trees, partially hidden behind a massive pine, was something. I've spent 20 years trying to find the right words to describe it, and I still can't quite capture it. It was black, not dark brown like a bear, but pure, light-absorbing black, and it seemed to shift, like it wasn't quite solid. Almost like if you took thick oil and shaped it into something vaguely person-sized, but it kept wanting to drip or flow. It was peering around the tree at me. I couldn't see a face exactly, but I knew it was watching me. I knew it with a certainty that sent ice through my veins. I'd like to say I reacted bravely, but I didn't. I screamed, this high-pitched, terrified shriek, and started pedaling faster than I'd ever pedaled in my life. My legs burned immediately with the effort, but pure adrenaline kept them pumping. The worst part was I couldn't stop looking back at the woods as I rode. It moved. God, how it moved. It didn't run like any animal I'd ever seen. It sort of flowed from tree to tree, keeping pace with me effortlessly. One moment it would be behind one tree, then it would sort of pour itself to the next one, always staying just inside the tree line, always watching me. It reminded me of when my dad would jog alongside me when I was first learning to ride a bike, that easy, relaxed pace of someone who could go much faster if they wanted to. Was it playing with me, hunting me? I didn't know, and that uncertainty was almost as terrifying as the thing itself. I remembered my Uncle Pete's house was coming up soon on the left. Uncle Pete was my dad's younger brother, a lifelong bachelor who'd built his own cabin off the main road. He worked at the paper mill in town, but was home most afternoons. I'd never been so happy to remember something in my entire life. When his dirt driveway came into view, I didn't even slow down. I just cranked the handlebars left and practically flew down it, my tires skidding in the loose gravel. I was so focused on getting to his door that I didn't even properly stop. Just threw my bike down about 10 feet from his porch and ran the rest of the way. I pounded on his door with both fists, constantly looking back toward the woods across from his house. I couldn't see the black thing anymore, but I knew it was still there watching. "Uncle Pete!" I screamed, still hammering on the door. "Uncle Pete!" The door swung open so suddenly I almost fell forward. Uncle Pete stood there in his usual flannel shirt with the sleeves cut off, a cigarette dangling from his mouth, his beard wild and untrimmed. He looked down at me with surprise. "Tim, what the hell's got into you, boy?" he asked, taking the cigarette from his mouth. Up close I could smell the mix of tobacco and the pine soap he always used. I was crying by then, big gulping sobs that made it hard to speak. There's something in the woods. It was following me. It's black and it moves weird." I'll never forget the way his expression changed. The annoyance faded, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. Concern, yes, but something else too. Recognition, maybe? Knowledge? "Calm down," he said, his voice gentler now. He stepped onto the porch and looked toward the woods where I'd come from. "What exactly did you see?" I tried to explain, my words tumbling out between sobs. It was black, like really black, and it kept following me, moving from tree to tree, not like a normal animal, like some kind of goo or something. It was watching me, Uncle Pete. He was quiet for a long moment, still staring at the trees. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "Wait here." He went back inside and returned a minute later with his hunting rifle. That scared me even more. If Uncle Pete thought he needed his gun, then what I'd seen was real. It wasn't just my imagination. "Probably just a bear," he said, but his voice had a tightness to it that I'd never heard before. "They get curious sometimes." "It wasn't a bear," I insisted, wiping my nose on my sleeve. "I've seen bears before. They don't move like that." Uncle Pete looked down at me, and there was something in his eyes I couldn't understand at the time. Now, as an adult, I think it might have been fear mixed with resignation. "Yep, they'll do that," he said flatly, contradicting himself in a way that confused me even then. He stepped off the porch, rifle held casually but ready. "Let's get your bike and I'll drive you home. It's probably gone now anyway." I didn't want to go back for my bike. It was only a few yards away, but it felt miles too close to the woods. Uncle Pete must have seen the terror on my face, because he sighed and walked over to get it himself, his eyes never leaving the tree line. As he picked up my bike, I saw him freeze for just a second, staring intently at something in the woods. My heart nearly stopped. He raised the rifle slightly, not quite aiming but definitely ready to. Then, after what felt like forever, he lowered it again and wheeled my bike back to the porch. "Hop in the truck, Tim," he said, his voice too calm. "I'll throw your bike in the back." The drive to my house took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. Uncle Pete didn't say much, just asked me not to tell my mom about what happened because she'd just worry for no reason. He told me to tell her I got tired and he gave me a ride home. But what about the thing in the woods? I asked as we pulled into my driveway. He turned off the engine and looked at me directly. Listen to me, Tim. The woods around here, they're old. Older than the town, older than the first settlers. Sometimes they have things in them we don't understand. He paused, like he was choosing his words carefully. Best thing to do is respect the woods. Stay on the paths. Don't go out alone for a while. But what was it? I pressed. Probably just a bear, he repeated, but we both knew he was lying. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that black flowing thing moving from tree to tree. I kept my curtains closed tight and my baseball bat next to my bed. The next day, my dad took me back to get my bike from Uncle Pete's. I was terrified, but daylight made everything seem less frightening. Uncle Pete was different too, joking around like normal, acting like nothing had happened. When I tried to bring it up, he just winked at me and changed the subject. Life went on. I didn't ride my bike down that trail for the rest of the summer. By the time school started in fall, the memory had begun to fade a little, becoming more like a nightmare than something that had actually happened. But I never forgot. Uncle Pete died about 8 years ago, heart attack, completely unexpected. We'd grown apart by then. I'd gone to college in Boston, got a job there, only came back to Maine for holidays. At his funeral, I wanted to ask my dad if Uncle Pete had ever mentioned that day, or what he might have known about what was in the woods, but something held me back. Maybe respect for the dead, or maybe fear of opening up something better left closed. I'm back in Boston now, working as an accountant, living a normal life, far away from those Maine woods. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still think about what I saw that day. I wonder if it's still there, flowing from tree to tree, watching, waiting. I wonder if anyone else has seen it, and I wonder what Uncle Pete knew that he never told me. Story 3. Have you never told this story to anyone outside my family? Even now, 5 years later, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I know what I saw, but I can't explain it. That day changed our lives forever. I was 16 when it happened, living in a shotgun-style house in New Orleans with my parents, my grandmother, and my baby brother Cameron. If you're not familiar with shotgun houses, they're these narrow rectangular homes where all the rooms connect in a straight line from front to back. You can literally fire a shotgun through the front door and have it exit the back without hitting a wall. Our house had been in the family for 3 generations, and we'd always joked about it being lived in rather than haunted. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. I remember because I was working on my AP history project that was due that Friday. My dad was at work, my mom was in the backyard gardening. She'd been trying to salvage her tomato plants before the weather turned, and my grandmother was in the living room watching her soap operas with the volume turned up way too loud, as usual. I was sitting at the dining room table, which was actually in our converted garage that connected to the kitchen. The dining room had this perfect view down the hallway that ran through most of the house. From where I sat, I could see straight past the kitchen, down the hall, past the bathroom door, and almost to my bedroom at the end. Cameron had just turned 1.5. He was at that stage where he was running everywhere, but still tripping over his own feet half the time. My mom had put him down for a nap about 20 minutes earlier. He'd been cranky all morning, probably because he was teething again. I was reaching for my water glass when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just something in my peripheral vision. You know how sometimes you think you see movement, but it's nothing. But this wasn't nothing. It was different. I'd seen shadows before. Growing up in an old house in New Orleans, you get used to the occasional weird thing. I'd seen shadow figures before. You know those human-shaped dark patches that seem to move on their own? I never found them particularly scary. They were just part of the house, like the creaky third step or the window in the bathroom that never fully closed. But this was different. This wasn't shaped like a person. It wasn't shaped like anything I recognized. It was just this blob. A dark, amorphous mass that seemed to absorb the light around it. It wasn't solid black, more like layers of darkness swirling together, and it was moving, not gliding like the shadow figures I'd seen before, but kind of pulsing, shifting, like it was constantly changing shape. I froze with my hand halfway to my water glass. The thing was drifting. That's really the only way to describe its movement, slowly down the hallway. I remember thinking it was weird that my grandmother hadn't noticed it, but she was completely absorbed in her show. The shadow thing paused at my bedroom door. My bedroom, where Cameron was napping. I suddenly felt cold all over, like I'd been dunked in ice water. I wanted to call out, to warn someone, but my voice wouldn't work. I just sat there watching as this thing oozed into my bedroom. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The house was quiet, except for the muffled sound of my grandmother's TV and the distant snipping of my mom's garden shears outside. I was just starting to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing when the screaming started. Cameron's screams weren't like normal baby cries. I've heard him cry plenty of times, when he was hungry or tired or when he bumped his head. This was different. This was raw terror. It was the kind of scream that makes your blood run cold. I was out of my chair before I even realized I was moving. I ran down the hallway, but before I could reach my bedroom, Cameron came barreling out. He was half running, half crawling, his little legs not quite keeping up with how fast he was trying to move. His face was bright red, tears streaming down his cheeks, and he was screaming, "Mama, Mama!" over and over. I scooped him up, and he clung to me so tight it almost hurt. His whole body was shaking. I'd never seen him like this. He buried his face in my neck, his little hands grabbing fistfuls of my shirt like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. My grandmother had finally heard the commotion and came hobbling down the hallway, asking what was wrong. My mom rushed in from the backyard seconds later, garden gloves still on her hands, dirt smudged across her forehead where she'd wiped away sweat. "What happened? Is he hurt?" Mom took Cameron from me, but he just screamed louder and reached back for me, which was weird because he was definitely a mama's boy. She checked him over. No bumps, no bruises, nothing physically wrong with him. I told them about the shadow I'd seen. My grandmother crossed herself. She's always been more superstitious than my parents. My mom just looked concerned, but I could tell she didn't really believe me. She thought Cameron had just had a nightmare, but I knew what I'd seen. And I knew it wasn't normal. We checked the bedroom together. Nothing was out of place. The window was closed and locked. Cameron's stuffed animals were still arranged at the foot of the pack-and-play where he napped. There was no sign that anything unusual had been there, except for the cold. My bedroom was freezing. It was October in New Orleans, not exactly sweater weather yet. The rest of the house was comfortably warm, but my room felt like a refrigerator. Mom blamed it on the old AC system being finicky, but I knew better. The rest of that day, Cameron wouldn't let me out of his sight. He wouldn't go near my bedroom either. When bedtime came, he threw an absolute fit when Mom tried to put him in his crib in the nursery. He ended up sleeping in my parents' bed that night, and the next night, and the night after that. Before this happened, Cameron could sleep anywhere, in his crib, in the car, in his stroller at the mall. He was the easiest baby when it came to naps and bedtime, but after that day, everything changed. He refused to sleep alone. If you put him down in a room by himself, he'd wake up within minutes, screaming those same terrified screams. The worst part was when he'd wake up in the middle of the night. He wouldn't just cry. He'd sit bolt upright, his eyes wide open but not seeing anything, and scream like something was right there in front of him. Mom called it night terrors, but I'd never seen night terrors make a kid look over his shoulder constantly like he was being followed. This went on for months. My parents were exhausted. My grandmother started burning sage in the house, which just made everything smell weird, and did absolutely nothing to help Cameron sleep. I felt guilty. Like somehow this was my fault. If I had moved faster, if I had called out when I first saw the shadow thing, maybe I could have stopped it from going into the bedroom. Maybe Cameron wouldn't be so traumatized. I never saw the shadow blob again. Sometimes I would catch movement out of the corner of my eye and my heart would start racing, but it was always just normal shadows or my imagination playing tricks on me. The human-shaped shadows I'd seen before still showed up occasionally, but they seemed harmless compared to whatever that thing had been. Gradually, Cameron started to get better. By the time he was 2, he could sleep in his own room again, though my parents kept a baby monitor on, even though he was past the age for it. The night terrors became less frequent. He stopped looking over his shoulder all the time. Now he's 6, and he probably doesn't even remember what happened. Kids are resilient like that. But sometimes, when he thinks no one is watching, I catch him staring warily into dark corners, and he still refuses to go into my old bedroom. Even though I've moved out for college, and it's been converted into a home office, I've tried researching what it could have been. New Orleans has no shortage of ghost stories and paranormal experts, but nothing quite matches what I saw. Most shadow entities are described as having a human form, or at least a recognizable shape. This was just darkness given substance. What bothers me most is the purposefulness of it. It didn't wander aimlessly. It went straight for the room where my baby brother was sleeping, like it knew he was there, like it wanted him specifically. I still live in New Orleans, just across town in a college apartment that has its own weird noises and drafts, but nothing like what was in our family home. Sometimes when I visit my parents, I find myself staring down that hallway, half expecting to see that swirling darkness again. I never do, but the memory of it is enough to make me check on Cameron before I leave, just to make sure he's okay. I don't know what that thing was or what it wanted with my brother. I don't know if it was something supernatural or just some weird shadow phenomenon that science hasn't explained yet. All I know is that I saw it, and whatever it was, it terrified my baby brother so badly that it changed him. Some experiences leave marks that aren't visible. I think Cameron carries those marks, even if he doesn't remember why. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and the shadows are long, I find myself wondering if it's still out there somewhere, looking for a way back in. Story 4. I still have nightmares about that hotel in Tijuana 2 years later, and I'm still asking myself what the hell happened that night. I'm not one of those people who believes in ghosts or supernatural stuff, but what I experienced, I just can't explain it. It was supposed to be a simple trip. My boyfriend Jake, my 3-year-old daughter Lily, and I had been visiting Jake's family in Mexico, and we were driving back to our home in San Diego. We'd done this drive before, but this time we got a late start and then hit this crazy rainstorm about an hour outside of Tijuana. The rain was coming down so hard you could barely see 5 feet in front of the car. Jake was driving white-knuckled, and I was getting more anxious by the minute, especially with Lily in the back seat. By the time we reached Tijuana, it was already getting dark, and the storm was only getting worse. Flash flood warnings were coming through on our phones. We made the call to just stay overnight and finish the drive in the morning when it was safer. Seemed simple enough, right? But finding a hotel room near the border on short notice turned into a complete nightmare. I called like 8 different places while Jake drove us around. Everything was booked because of some convention and people stranded by the storm like us. I was starting to think we'd have to sleep in our car when I finally got through to this place called Hotel Frontera. The woman at the front desk told me they had exactly 1 room left on the 6th floor. I didn't even ask about the price. I just said we'd take it. At that point, I was desperate to get my cranky toddler out of the car and into a proper bed. The hotel looked decent enough from the outside, not fancy but not sketchy either. The lobby had this weird mix of old and new, like they'd renovated half of it and ran out of money for the rest. The elevator was ancient and made this grinding noise that made me wonder if we'd get stuck between floors. Lily thought it was hilarious and kept saying, "Funny elevator," over and over. When we finally got to our room, the first thing that hit me was the heat. It felt like walking into a sauna. I immediately went to check the air conditioning unit while Jake got Lily settled. The AC was running, but it was blowing hot air. The digital thermostat on the wall read 86 degrees. I called down to the front desk and they said they'd send someone up. 20 minutes later, this maintenance guy shows up who barely speaks English. I don't speak much Spanish, but Jake does, so he explained the problem. The guy fiddled with the unit for like 15 minutes, then just shrugged and said something to Jake. He says the whole system on this floor is having problems, Jake translated. He can't fix it tonight. I called the front desk again and told them we couldn't stay in a room that hot, especially with a toddler. They were reluctant at first, but after I mentioned potentially bad reviews and my daughter's comfort, they finally agreed to move us. The only other room they had available was on the first floor, at the very end of the hallway near some maintenance closet and an exit door. I wasn't thrilled about being on the ground floor, but it was either that or sweat all night in an 86-degree room. The first floor room was a significant downgrade. It smelled stale, like nobody had stayed there in months. The sheets were cold and stiff, and there was this persistent dripping sound coming from the bathroom faucet that wouldn't stop no matter how tightly we turned the knob. But the air conditioning worked, so I was willing to overlook the rest. We put Lily to bed in one of the 2 double beds, and Jake and I watched some Spanish TV for a while before turning in ourselves. Jake fell asleep almost immediately. He can sleep through anything, but I was having trouble. Something about the room just felt off. I kept hearing noises from the hallway, people walking by, doors closing. I must have finally dozed off around midnight because I remember checking my phone one last time. What happened next still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I woke up to this strange, dragging sound coming from behind the headboard. At first, I thought it was just the building settling or pipes making noise. But then it changed to soft thumps against the wall. Thump, 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 in a steady rhythm. I nudged Jake, but he just grunted and rolled over. The man could sleep through a tornado. I needed to pee, so I carefully got out of bed, trying not to wake Lily or Jake. As soon as my feet hit the floor, the sound stopped. Complete silence. I used the bathroom, and as I was washing my hands, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I looked exhausted, with dark circles under my eyes. The bathroom light was this harsh fluorescent that made everything look sickly and pale. When I got back into bed, I thought maybe I had imagined the sounds. But no more than 5 minutes after I pulled the covers up, they started again. This time, the dragging was louder, more deliberate, and the thumps had a different quality to them, almost like someone was knocking on the wall trying to get my attention. Then came the weeping. It was soft at first, barely audible, a muffled sobbing sound coming from behind the wall. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I sat up in bed, straining to hear better, trying to convince myself it was just someone in the next room having a bad night. But the longer I listened, the less it sounded like normal crying. There was something wrong about it, something inhuman. It had this hollow quality, like it was coming from very far away, even though it was clearly just on the other side of the wall. Lily woke up then, probably because I was moving around so much. She was groggy and confused, asking for water. I was actually relieved to have a distraction. I got her some water from the bathroom, then decided to move her into bed with Jake. I told myself it was so she wouldn't wake up again, but honestly, I was scared and didn't want her in the bed closest to that wall. This gave me a bed to myself, which under normal circumstances would have been a treat. I got back into my bed and tried to calm down. The noises had stopped while I was dealing with Lily. I closed my eyes and took deep breaths, telling myself I was just tired and my mind was playing tricks on me. But minutes later, the dragging sound came back, and the weeping, louder this time. I could make out these gasping sobs, the kind that come after someone has been crying for a long time and can barely catch their breath. I sat up again, trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness. That's when I saw it, a roundish shadow peeking from the edge of the bathroom doorway. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, my eyes creating patterns in the darkness. But then it moved. It slowly emerged from the doorway, this formless black mass, darker than the darkness around it. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just watched as this thing, this shadow, seemed to look at me from the bathroom doorway. It had no eyes that I could see, no face at all, but somehow I knew it was watching me. And then, in an instant, it was gone. I pulled the sheets over my head like a frightened child. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The thumping on the wall increased in pace, not staying in one place anymore but scattering up the wall. The weeping grew louder, more frantic. I could hear the sounds moving up, until they reached the ceiling above me. I don't know how long I stayed like that, trembling under the sheets. It could have been minutes or hours. I kept telling myself to be rational, to get up and wake Jake, but fear had completely paralyzed me. When I finally gathered enough courage to pull the sheets down, everything happened at once. A loud, sobbing screech erupted right next to my ear, so close I could feel the cold breath on my skin. I screamed and fell out of the bed, scrambling backward until my back hit the wall. Jake shot up, turning on the light. "What's wrong? What happened?" he asked, looking around frantically. I couldn't speak. I just pointed to the space beside my bed, but there was nothing there. No shadow, no figure, just empty space. Jake thought I'd had a nightmare. He helped me back to bed, checked on Lily, who somehow slept through my scream, and then went back to sleep himself after making sure I was okay. But I wasn't okay, not even close. I stayed awake until dawn, sitting upright with my back against the headboard, jumping at every little sound. The noises didn't come back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows of the room. When morning finally came, I was the first one up. I immediately went to the front desk to ask about the room behind ours. The clerk looked confused and then explained there was no room there, just the maintenance closet and the exit door I'd seen when we checked in. Later, as we were packing up to leave, Jake mentioned he'd heard me yell during the night but was too tired to fully wake up. "You were saying something about someone crying," he said casually, like it was no big deal. "I figured you were having a bad dream." I didn't tell him the full story. How do you explain something like that without sounding crazy? I just said I'd had a nightmare and left it at that. 2 years later, and I still don't know what happened in that hotel room. Was it an actual ghost, some kind of hallucination from exhaustion, or is there a rational explanation I'm missing? All I know is that I've had to stay in Tijuana one more time since then, and I specifically asked for a room on a high floor, as far away from the maintenance areas as possible. And I brought earplugs, strong ones. Some nights when I'm drifting off to sleep, I still hear that weeping, and sometimes, just as I'm about to fall asleep, I feel like there's something watching me from the corner of the room, waiting for me to let my guard down. Story 5. I still can't believe what happened to us in Bayouville. It's been 3 months since we left that place, and I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes. I need to get this off my chest, so here goes. When my husband Brian got the promotion to manage the oil refinery in Bayouville, Louisiana, I was actually excited. The pay was great, and the company was providing housing, a 2-bedroom apartment right on the refinery grounds. It seemed perfect for us newlyweds trying to save for our own place. We arrived on a muggy Tuesday in June. The refinery was this sprawling industrial complex with tall smokestacks and a constant low hum. Our apartment was in a brick building attached to the administrative offices. It wasn't fancy, but it was free, and the kitchen had been renovated recently. While unloading our stuff, one of the workers, I think his name was Dale, helped us carry boxes. He kept giving me these weird looks whenever I mentioned plans for decorating or making the place homier. "You folks settling into Jack's old place, all right?" he asked, setting down a heavy box in our living room. "Jack Harmon, the previous manager?" Brian asked. Dale nodded. "Yep, shame what happened. Real shame." When we pressed him for details, he just mumbled something about Jack being a private person and left quickly. I remember thinking it was odd, but figured it was just small-town awkwardness. That first week was busy with unpacking and Brian learning the ropes at work. The apartment had this strange layout, like someone had modified it without much planning. The laundry room especially felt off. It was too big for just a washer and dryer, but had this weird blank wall that seemed out of place. I discovered it by accident about 2 weeks after moving in. I was doing laundry when I noticed the wallpaper pattern didn't quite match in one corner. When I pressed against it, a section of the wall moved slightly. My curiosity got the best of me. I pushed harder and found a hidden panel that slid to the side, revealing a narrow staircase leading up to what I assumed was an attic space. With a mixture of excitement and unease, I grabbed my phone for light and climbed the stairs. They creaked with every step. At the top was a small room, maybe 12 by 15 feet, with a tiny window. The space was empty except for an old desk pushed against one wall and some shelves. The air felt stale, like the room had been sealed for months. When Brian got home, I showed him my discovery. He seemed more concerned than excited. "This isn't on any of the building plans," he said, examining the hidden panel mechanism. "Someone built this themselves." The next day at work, Brian asked around about modifications to the apartment. That's when we learned the full story about Jack Harmon. Jack had managed the refinery for 7 years before Brian. He was a loner who kept to himself, occasionally making odd comments about needing personal space where nobody could bother him. Apparently, he'd constructed the hidden room himself over several weekends, telling maintenance staff he was just doing minor repairs. About 6 months before we arrived, Jack stopped showing up for work. Nobody thought much of it at first. He sometimes took days off without notice, but after nearly a week of absence and no returned calls, people started to worry. The smell was what finally alerted them. Workers in the offices below our apartment complained about a foul odor coming through the vents. Maintenance checked the apartment but couldn't find anything. It wasn't until someone remembered Jack's odd construction projects that they thought to look for hidden spaces. They found him in that room. He'd been dead for nearly 5 days. Heart attack, they said. He'd created a space where nobody could find him, and in the end, that's exactly what happened. I was horrified. We'd been living in an apartment where someone had died alone, undiscovered for days. But Brian pointed out that people die in houses all the time, and the previous tenants aren't always told. It was unfortunate but not supernatural. We discussed what to do with the hidden room. It seemed wasteful to just seal it up again. The apartment was small, and we could use the extra space. After some cleaning and a fresh coat of paint, we decided to turn it into a guest room. I picked out a nice daybed, a small dresser, and some curtains for the window. I even put up some cheerful art prints to brighten the space. A month later, my daughter Olivia came to visit. She was 19 and spending summer break with us before heading back to college. We hadn't seen her in months, and I was thrilled to have her stay for a couple of weeks. When I showed her the guest room, she hesitated at the narrow staircase. "You want me to sleep in a hidden room? That's kind of creepy, Mom." I laughed it off. "It's not hidden anymore. I've decorated it nicely and it's private. You'll have your own little space away from me and Brian." She reluctantly agreed, but insisted on leaving the panel to the staircase open at night. "I don't want to get trapped up there," she said, only half joking. The first 2 nights went fine. On the 3rd night, I was awakened by Olivia shaking me awake, her face pale. "Mom, someone was trying to get into my room," she whispered, her voice trembling. I sat up, immediately alert. "What do you mean? Did you hear someone in the apartment?" She shook her head. "The doorknob at the top of the stairs. It was jiggling really hard, like someone was trying to get in. Then the door slammed shut by itself." Brian checked the apartment thoroughly. All windows and doors were locked, and there was no sign of an intruder. We checked the hidden room's door. It had no lock, just a simple knob. There was no way it could have locked itself, and no explanation for the jiggling she described. "Maybe it was the wind," Brian suggested, though we all knew the room had only one small window that didn't open. Olivia slept on our couch that night. The next morning she seemed embarrassed by her fear. "I probably just had a bad dream," she said over breakfast. "I'm going to try sleeping up there again tonight." I wasn't sure that was a good idea, but I didn't want to feed into any irrational fears. Brian and I exchanged worried glances but agreed. That night, I woke up around 3 in the morning with an uneasy feeling. I checked on Olivia, climbing the narrow stairs quietly. She was asleep, looking peaceful enough. As I turned to leave, I noticed the temperature in the room was significantly colder than the rest of the apartment, despite the summer heat. I pulled her blanket up higher and went back to bed. The next morning, Olivia came down looking exhausted. She sat at the kitchen table, clutching her coffee mug with both hands. I had the worst nightmare, she said. There was a man watching me from the ceiling. He was just hanging there staring down at me. His eyes were all bulgy, and he was wearing this red and black flannel shirt and overalls. A chill ran through me. It was just a dream, honey. It felt so real, like he was actually there. She shuddered. I'm not sleeping up there again. Later that day, Brian mentioned Olivia's nightmare to a couple of the older workers during lunch. One of them, an older man named Frank, who'd been at the refinery for decades, went completely still. She saw a man in flannel and overalls, with bulging eyes, he asked. Brian nodded, confused by his reaction. Frank exchanged glances with another worker. That's exactly what Jack was wearing when they found him. Red and black flannel shirt, denim overalls, and, well, when they found him after that long in the heat. He didn't need to finish. Bodies change after death, especially in Louisiana humidity. The detail about the bulging eyes made horrible sense. The thing is, Olivia had never seen a picture of Jack. We hadn't described him to her. There was no way she could have known what he looked like, let alone what he was wearing when he died. That night, Olivia refused to sleep in the hidden room, camping out on our couch instead. Around midnight, we all heard it, a heavy thudding noise coming from upstairs, like footsteps or something being dragged across the floor. Brian grabbed a baseball bat and went to investigate while I stayed with Olivia. He came back looking confused. There's nothing up there, he said. But... He hesitated. But what? I pressed. The desk, the old one we left in the corner, it's moved. It's now in the middle of the room. We decided to all sleep in the living room that night with the lights on. None of us said it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. Jack was still in his room. The next morning, Brian went to work while Olivia and I stayed home. I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard Olivia scream. I ran to find her standing at the bottom of the hidden staircase, pointing up with a shaking hand. I heard whispering, she said, like someone talking to themselves, and when I looked up, I saw a shadow move across the wall. I called Brian, who came home immediately. We packed some essentials and checked into a motel in town. That afternoon, Brian spoke with his supervisor about the apartment. To our surprise, the man wasn't shocked. 3 maintenance guys have refused to go into that room to fix the ventilation, he admitted. They say they feel someone watching them. One guy said his tools kept getting moved when he turned his back. We learned that before us, the company had tried to put another employee in the apartment, but he'd left after just 2 weeks, claiming he couldn't sleep because of constant noises from the hidden room. We never spent another night in that apartment. Brian arranged for a transfer to another facility, and the company was surprisingly accommodating, almost like they were expecting it. Before we left, I went back once more to collect the rest of our things. I couldn't help myself. I had to look at the hidden room one last time. The room was ice cold despite the summer heat. The desk had moved again, now positioned directly under where the ceiling light hung, and on the desk was a single sheet of paper with a crude drawing that hadn't been there before, a sketch of a man standing in a small room, looking out a tiny window. In the corner of the paper, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were the words, "My space." I left everything else behind and never looked back. The company sealed up the hidden room after we left. They told Brian they were renovating the apartment, but I think they were really just closing off that space permanently. I still think about Jack sometimes, creating his private sanctuary only to die there alone, undiscovered for days. I think his spirit is still attached to that room, the space he created, the place that was truly his, and ultimately, the place where he died. And I don't think he appreciated us trying to claim it as our own. We've moved on with our lives, but Olivia still has nightmares about a man watching her from the ceiling. Some spaces aren't meant to be found, and some secrets should stay hidden. I just wish we'd known that before we slid open that panel in the laundry room wall. Story 6. I still can't explain what happened that night. It's been 3 months, and I keep replaying it in my head. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or supernatural stuff. At least I wasn't before. I've always been pretty rational, skeptical even. My partner Lily says I overthink everything. But what I saw that night in Westbrook doesn't make any logical sense, and it's driving me crazy. It was a Friday night in October. Nothing special about the day. I'd worked from home, Lily had come back from her shift at the hospital around 6, and we were heading to our friend Dave's place for dinner and board games. We've made this drive dozens of times. It's literally just through a few suburban neighborhoods, maybe 5 minutes on a bad day. We left our apartment around 7:30. I remember checking the time because Dave had texted asking when we'd arrive. The weather was clear but chilly, that perfect fall temperature where you need a light jacket but nothing heavy. Lily was tired from her shift and was telling me about a difficult patient she'd dealt with. I was only half listening, to be honest, because I was thinking about this work project that was stressing me out. We were about halfway to Dave's when we hit a red light at the intersection of Maple and Chestnut. It's a normal suburban intersection, gas station on one corner, small strip mall with a dry cleaner and Chinese restaurant on another. But that night, something was off. On the other side of the intersection, 3 consecutive street lights were out or dimmed, creating this unusually dark stretch of road. I noticed it right away because it created this weird pocket of darkness, maybe 30 or 40 feet where you couldn't see much of anything. The contrast between the well-lit intersection where we were stopped and that dark zone ahead was jarring. That's when I saw it. From the right side of the road, I saw something moving across the street. At first, I thought it was just someone crossing, but there was something off about the way it moved. It was shuffling rather than walking normally. I could make out what looked like baggy pants and something like a long coat or duster. The whole figure was just dark. Not like a person wearing dark clothes, but like a piece of night that had decided to take human form. "Hey, do you see that person crossing up there?" I asked Lily, nodding toward the dark stretch. Lily squinted. "What person? I don't see anyone." "Right there, about 75 feet ahead. Someone in baggy clothes crossing from right to left." She kept looking but shook her head. "I can't see anything in that dark spot. You know my night vision is terrible." I kept watching. The figure had crossed about 3/4 of the way across the street when it seemed to turn. I swear it turned toward our car. I couldn't make out any facial features. It was just a silhouette, a shadow. But I had this overwhelming feeling that it was looking directly at us, at me. The light turned green. "There's someone there," I insisted as I started driving forward. "You'll see when we get closer." I was fully expecting to drive past this person walking on the sidewalk. Maybe they were drunk or something, which would explain the weird shuffling. Or maybe they were hurt and needed help. Either way, I was sure we'd see them clearly once our headlights hit that dark stretch. We drove forward into that pocket of darkness. Our headlights swept across the area where I'd seen the figure heading. There was nothing there, just an empty sidewalk with some low tree branches casting shadows. I slowed down, looking hard at the spot where the figure should have been. Nothing. No person walking away, no one hiding behind a tree, absolutely nothing. "Where'd they go?" I muttered, more to myself than to Lily. "Who?" Lily asked, sounding concerned. "Marcus, there's nobody out here." I kept driving, but slower now, scanning both sides of the street. The figure had clearly been heading toward the sidewalk on the left, but there was nowhere they could have gone. No alleys, no driveways, just continuous sidewalk with some landscaping and the occasional tree. It's like they had just disappeared, melted into the concrete. "I swear I saw someone crossing the road back there," I said, feeling a cold sensation creeping up my spine. They were right there, and then nothing. "Maybe they ducked behind a tree," Lily suggested, but her tone made it clear she was just humoring me. "There wasn't time," I said, "and nowhere to hide. They were right there, and then they weren't." We continued the drive to Dave's place, but I couldn't focus on anything else. What had I seen? A trick of the light? Some weird shadow from passing cars? But there had been no other cars at that intersection. Just us, waiting at the red light, and that figure. When we got to Dave's, I was still distracted. Our friends noticed I wasn't really participating in conversations, and I kept zoning out during the board games. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. It wasn't scary in the moment, just deeply confusing. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. On the drive home later that night, I insisted we take the same route. Lily thought I was being weird but didn't argue. When we approached that same intersection, I slowed down, studying the area carefully. The streetlights were working fine now. The dark stretch was gone. The sidewalk where I'd seen the figure disappear looked completely normal under the yellow glow of functioning streetlights. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. "See? Everything's normal," Lily said, yawning. "You probably just saw shadows from tree branches or something." But I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't a shadow from a tree. It moved with purpose, with a shuffling gait that was distinctly human-like, and the way it turned toward our car, like it knew we were watching, like it wanted me to see it. Over the next few weeks, I found myself taking detours to drive through that intersection at different times of day and night. I never saw the streetlights out again, never saw the figure, but every time I drove through there, I felt this strange sensation, like I was being watched. I started researching online. That's when I found out about shadow people. Apparently they're a phenomenon that lots of people have reported seeing. Dark, human-shaped figures that appear briefly and then vanish. Some people believe they're interdimensional beings or spirits. Others think they're hallucinations or the brain trying to make sense of movement seen in peripheral vision. The thing is, this wasn't in my peripheral vision. I saw it clearly, directly in front of me. I watched it cross most of the road before it disappeared. I tried telling a couple of friends about it, but they reacted like Lily did, suggesting it was just shadows, or maybe I was more tired than I realized. No one seemed to take it seriously, so I stopped mentioning it. But I can't stop thinking about it. What was that thing? Why could I see it when Lily couldn't? And where did it go? The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced of what I saw. It wasn't a normal person. Normal people don't just vanish into thin air, and it wasn't just shadows or my imagination. It was something else. I've started noticing other strange things since that night. Sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I'll catch a glimpse of movement. That same shuffling gait. When I turn to look, there's nothing there. I'll be working at my desk and suddenly feel like someone's standing behind me. But when I turn around, the room is empty. Last week, I was alone in our apartment. Lily was working a night shift. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I felt that same sensation, like I was being watched. I turned around quickly and swear I saw a dark shape move from the hallway into our bedroom. I called out, thinking maybe Lily had come home early, but there was no answer. I checked the bedroom, empty. Checked the whole apartment. Nothing. But that feeling of being watched lingered all night. I haven't told Lily about these other incidents. She's already worried about me becoming obsessed with what happened that night at the intersection. She thinks I need to let it go. Maybe she's right. Maybe focusing on it is making me imagine things that aren't there. But what if they are there? What if that figure I saw crossing the road wasn't a one-time thing? What if, by seeing it, I somehow opened myself up to something? I keep thinking about how it turned toward our car, toward me, like it knew I could see it, like it was acknowledging me or choosing me. I don't know what to do with this experience. I don't know how to process it or make sense of it. All I know is that I saw something impossible that night, a shadow person crossing a suburban street in Westbrook, and now I can't unsee it. I can't forget it. And sometimes I think it hasn't forgotten me either. I drive through that intersection almost daily now. I always slow down, always look for that dark stretch of road, for that shuffling figure. I haven't seen it again, not there, at least. But sometimes, when I'm looking out our apartment window at night, I catch a glimpse of something moving across the parking lot. something that doesn't quite move like a person should, and I wonder if it followed me home from that intersection. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'll ever understand what I saw that night. But I know this. There are things in this world that we can't explain. Things that exist in the shadows, just on the edge of our reality. And once you've seen them, you can't go back to not knowing they're there. Story 7. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family before. Even typing this makes my hands shake a little. But I need to get this out there. Maybe someone has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of what happened. This happened 3 years ago when I was 14. My parents decided to have a date night at this fancy restaurant downtown that had just opened. They rarely went out together since they both worked different schedules, so I encouraged them to go. I told them I'd be fine alone for a few hours. I was 14, not a baby. They left around 6 in the evening, promising they'd be back by 10. Our house is in one of those typical Atlanta suburbs where all the houses look pretty similar. 2 stories, decent yards, and neighbors close enough that you can see their living rooms from your windows. We'd lived there since I was 9, and I'd never felt unsafe there before that night. After my parents left, I made myself some mac and cheese and decided to watch a horror movie. Yeah, stupid decision. I know that now. It was some slasher film about a home invasion. I thought I could handle it. I'd watched scary movies with friends before, and we'd just laugh about the stupid decisions the characters made. But watching alone hits different. By 8 o'clock, the sun had completely set, and our house was filled with that weird silence that only happens when you're home alone. Every creak of the house settling made me jump. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a movie, and I was safe in my locked house. I went to the kitchen to get some water, and that's when I first noticed him. Through the window above the sink, I could see the end of our driveway, where it meets the street. There was a street light right there, and standing just at the edge of its light was a tall figure in a dark hoodie, just standing there, watching our house. My first thought was that it was probably just someone waiting for someone else, or maybe a neighbor out for a walk who stopped to check their phone. But he didn't move. He just stood there, face hidden by the hood, hands in his pockets. Something about the way he was positioned, directly facing our house, made my skin crawl. I ducked down below the window, heart pounding. After counting to 30, I peeked again. He was still there, in exactly the same position. I grabbed my phone to call my parents, but hesitated. They were having their first night out in months, and I didn't want to ruin it because I was being paranoid after watching a stupid horror movie. Instead, I texted my mom, "Having fun? Everything's fine here." She texted back almost immediately, "Great dinner. Be home in about an hour and a half. Love you." I decided to turn off the TV and switch on all the downstairs lights. The house had one of those security systems that beeps whenever a door or window opens, which made me feel a little safer. I went back to the kitchen window and looked out again. He was gone. I let out a huge breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. See, just someone waiting for a ride or something. I laughed at myself for being so jumpy and grabbed a bag of chips from the pantry. That's when I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from the back door. At first, I thought it might be our neighbor's cat. It sometimes wandered onto our porch, but then the scratching became more deliberate, like fingernails slowly dragging down the wooden door. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. Why would I announce that I was home alone? The scratching stopped. Silence. Then, so quiet I almost missed it. A whisper. "Let me in." I froze, chips falling from my hand onto the floor. It wasn't loud or menacing. That's what made it worse. It was soft, almost childlike, but with something wrong about it. Something that didn't sound fully human. "Let me in." It came again, a little louder this time. "I'm cold out here." I backed away from the door, nearly tripping over a chair. "My parents will be home any minute," I lied, trying to make my voice sound confident. "And I've already called the police." Silence again, then a giggle. A high-pitched, delighted giggle that sent ice through my veins. I ran to the living room, grabbed my phone, and tried to call 911, but the call wouldn't go through. I looked at my screen. No service. That had never happened before in our house. I tried my parents'. Same thing. No service. And then all the lights went out. The darkness was instant and complete. Outside, I could see that the street lights were still on, and lights shined from neighbors' windows. It was just our house. Power outage, I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. Just a coincidence. But I knew the power box was outside, near the back door. Someone would have had to deliberately switch it off. I remembered my phone flashlight and turned it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. My phone battery was at 15%. Great. The scratching started again, but now it was coming from the side of the house by the dining room windows. It was moving, circling the house. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Then it stopped, and I heard footsteps on the front porch. Slow, deliberate steps. Knock, knock, knock. "I know you're alone in there," came the whisper, somehow audible through the door. "Let me in, Mia." It knew my name. How did it know my name? My breathing was coming in short gasps now. I was trapped in a dark house with something outside that knew who I was and no way to call for help. My phone battery had dropped to 12%. The knocking moved from the front door to the living room window, then to the dining room, then toward the back of the house again. Whatever it was circling, testing every possible entrance. I remembered what my dad always said: "If you're scared, get angry instead. Fear makes you freeze. Anger makes you act." So I tried to get angry. This thing, this person, was terrorizing me in my own home. Who did they think they were? I quietly moved to the kitchen and grabbed a knife from the drawer. The weight of it in my hand made me feel slightly more in control. I decided to go upstairs. All the bedrooms had locks on the doors, and I could barricade myself in my parents' room, which had the strongest door and a landline phone. As I crept up the stairs, the scratching suddenly stopped. The house became completely silent. Had they given up? I paused on the stairs, listening. Nothing. I continued up to the second floor, my phone flashlight showing the way. I went straight to my parents' bedroom, but when I tried the landline, it was dead too. Of course, my phone battery was at 8% now. I sat on my parents' bed, knife in hand, straining to hear any sound from downstairs. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Maybe whoever it was had left. Then I heard something that made no sense, the sound of running water. It was coming from the bathroom across the hall. I knew I should stay put, but something pulled me toward that sound. With my phone flashlight leading the way and the knife gripped tightly in my other hand, I crept to the bathroom door, which was slightly ajar. The sink was running full blast. I definitely hadn't left it on. I pushed the door open wider with my foot and raised the knife. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror above the sink was fogged up as if from hot steam, even though the water running was cold. And in the fog on the mirror, someone had drawn a smiley face. As I stared at it transfixed, the fog began to clear from the center outward, and in the reflection, I saw something behind me, a small figure, much shorter than me, a child. I whirled around, but there was nothing there. When I turned back to the mirror, the child's reflection remained. It was a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with pale skin and dark, hollow eyes. She wore what looked like an old-fashioned nightgown, and her hair hung in limp strands around her thin face. But the worst part was her smile, wide and unnatural, stretching too far across her face. "You let me in," she said, her mouth barely moving despite the words I clearly heard. "Thank you." I screamed and dropped my phone, the light spinning crazily around the bathroom before going out completely as the battery died. In the sudden darkness, I felt something cold brush against my arm. "I've been so lonely," the voice whispered, right next to my ear. I ran. I didn't care about the knife I'd dropped or my dead phone. I just ran, stumbling down the stairs in the darkness, slamming into walls, desperate to get out. I could hear giggling behind me, getting closer. When I reached the front door, I fumbled with the lock, my fingers numb and clumsy with terror. Behind me, the giggling stopped, and instead, I heard a soft singing, a lullaby I didn't recognize, in a language I didn't understand. The door finally opened and I burst outside, not stopping until I reached my elderly neighbor Mrs. Thompson's house. I pounded on her door, sobbing uncontrollably. Mrs. Thompson took one look at my face and pulled me inside. Between gasps, I told her what happened. I expected her to tell me I was imagining things or that it was just some neighborhood kid playing a prank. Instead, she went very quiet and made me sit down while she made tea with shaking hands. "There was a little girl who went missing in this neighborhood about 30 years ago," she finally said, not meeting my eyes. "They never found her. Some people say they've seen her or heard her, especially in your house. It's why the previous owners left." I stared at her. "Why didn't anyone tell us this before we moved in?" She just shook her head. "People don't like to talk about it, and nothing had happened for years. We thought it was over." My parents came to get me at Mrs. Thompson's house, frantic after finding our home empty and in darkness. They called an electrician the next day who found no explanation for the power outage. The phone company said there had been no service disruptions in our area. We never talked about moving. My parents didn't fully believe my story. They thought I'd scared myself watching horror movies alone, but they did agree to install better security lighting and cameras. I still live in that house. I've never seen the girl in the mirror again, but sometimes when I'm alone, I hear humming, and occasionally I'll find a tiny handprint on a fogged-up mirror or window, and I never, ever watch horror movies when I'm home alone anymore. Story 8. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that night in Ashford. It's been years, but the memory is still crystal clear, like it happened yesterday. Some experiences just stick with you, you know? This is one of those things I can't explain, and trust me, I've tried. I grew up in a semi-detached house in Ashford. Pretty normal neighborhood, quiet street, nothing special. Our neighbor was this guy named Jack. He must have been in his early 50s when I was a kid. Jack worked for the railways and kept to himself most of the time. He wasn't unfriendly exactly, just private. The kind of neighbor who'd give you a quick nod if you passed on the street, but wasn't one for small talk. For the first few years after we moved in, we barely saw him. My mom used to say he was a bit odd, but my dad always defended him, saying some people just prefer their own company. I remember being kind of scared of him when I was really little. Probably because he was tall, had this serious face, and rarely smiled. Everything changed during one autumn evening when I was about 9. My dad had built this massive bonfire in our back garden. We'd been clearing out some old furniture and decided to make an event of it. Dad, being Dad, thought it would be neighborly to invite Jack over for a beer. To everyone's surprise, Jack actually accepted. That night by the fire, Jack transformed from the mysterious neighbor into a real person. He was actually fascinating once he opened up. Turns out he was incredibly skilled with his hands. He'd built this amazing workshop in his garage where he created all sorts of mechanical things. He had this coal-fueled steam boiler that powered various machines he'd built himself. My eyes nearly popped out of my head when he described it all. After that night, Jack became almost like an uncle to us. He still valued his privacy, but he told my parents that we were welcome to knock on his door any time. I started visiting his workshop after school sometimes, watching him work. He'd explain what he was doing, showing me how different mechanisms worked. The smell of oil and coal dust, the hissing of the steam. It's all still so vivid in my memory. Then came that awful night when I was 14. We had this massive thunderstorm, one of those summer storms where the lightning is practically constant and the thunder shakes the whole house. I remember being in my room, trying to read but getting distracted by the storm. Around midnight, we heard ambulance sirens, and my dad went outside to see what was happening. He came back looking pale. Jack had collapsed on the pavement between our houses. Heart attack. He was already gone by the time the ambulance arrived. The worst part came a few days later. My mum noticed there were marks on our shared wall, the one between our living room and Jack's. Dad realized what had happened. Jack had been banging on the wall, trying to get our attention when he started feeling unwell, but with the storm, none of us had heard him. I still get this sick feeling in my stomach thinking about it. Him desperately trying to reach us while we sat oblivious on the other side of that wall. Life moved on, as it always does. A young couple moved into Jack's house about 6 months later. They had a baby, a little girl named Lily. They were nice enough, not as interesting as Jack, but friendly. They did a lot of work on the house, modernizing it and painting over the dark colors Jack had preferred. When I was 16, the couple asked if I'd babysit Lily one Friday night while they went to a friend's wedding anniversary. I'd done it a few times before, so I agreed. Lily was usually asleep by 7:30, giving me plenty of free time to watch TV and raid their fridge, with permission, of course. That night started like any other babysitting gig. I arrived around 7, the couple gave me the usual instructions, emergency numbers, etc., and left. Lily was already fed and bathed, just needed to be put down for the night, which I did without any issues. By 8 o'clock, I was sprawled on their sofa, flipping through channels until I found MTV. I kept the volume low so I wouldn't wake Lily. Their house had the same layout as ours, just mirrored. The living room had this small wooden side table near the sofa, the kind people put drinks on. It was on my right, maybe 3 feet away from where I was sitting. I'd been watching TV for about an hour when it happened. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, a soft tapping sound, like someone gently rapping their knuckles on wood. I muted the TV and listened. There it was again, a distinct tapping coming from the side table. But it wasn't random tapping, it sounded deliberate, like someone tapping out a simple melody. Tap, 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 tap. Different pressures, different notes, almost musical. The couple's cat, which had been sleeping on the armchair, suddenly sat up and stared directly at the table. His ears were perked forward, completely focused on the source of the sound. That's when I knew I wasn't imagining things. The tapping continued for maybe 15 seconds total. Not long, but long enough that I couldn't write it off as the house settling or something falling. It was rhythmic and intentional, and then it stopped. I don't know how to describe what I felt in that moment. It wasn't terror exactly. More like, you know that expression, someone walking over your grave? That's what it felt like. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this overwhelming sensation of being watched. Not in a threatening way, but definitely not alone. After a minute of sitting frozen on the sofa, I worked up the courage to investigate. I reached over and tapped my own knuckles on the table. It made the same hollow wooden sound, but I couldn't replicate the varied notes I'd heard. The table itself was completely ordinary, no hidden mechanisms, no loose parts. I got up and checked the whole house. All the doors were locked. Lily was still sound asleep in her crib. The windows were closed against the autumn chill. There was absolutely no explanation for what I'd heard. I spent the rest of the evening with every light in the house turned on, the TV volume a bit louder than it should have been. I kept glancing at that table, half expecting the tapping to start again, but it never did. When the couple came home around midnight, I nearly blurted out what had happened, but stopped myself. They were tired, slightly tipsy, and the last thing they needed was to think their babysitter was making up ghost stories about their new home. I went back to our house, crawled into bed, and lay awake for hours. That's when it hit me. The table was positioned against the same wall where Jack had tapped for help during the storm, the same wall that had separated us, that had muffled his desperate attempts to be heard. In the years since, I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was the pipes. Maybe the wooden table was contracting in the cooling night air. Maybe the cat saw a bug I didn't notice. But none of those explanations feel right. There was an intentionality to those taps, a pattern, a message, and the timing. Jack had been a railway worker. He would have known Morse code. Was he trying again to communicate through that wall from wherever he was now? I never experienced anything like it again, despite babysitting Lily many more times in that house. Whatever happened that night was a one-time occurrence. The couple never mentioned experiencing anything unusual, and I never told them what I'd heard. I'm not saying it was definitely Jack's ghost or anything. I've never been particularly superstitious, and I'm still not. But something happened that night that I can't explain. Maybe it was Jack. trying once more to reach across that boundary between us, not asking for help this time, just letting us know he was there. Or maybe it was just a strange coincidence, a random noise that my guilt-ridden teenage brain turned into something more meaningful. All I know is that whenever I hear someone tapping on wood, even now, 20 years later, I feel that same chill run down my spine, and for just a second, I'm back in that living room, listening to a message I couldn't quite understand from someone who might have been trying to reach us one last time. Story 9. Have you never been the type to believe in ghosts or demons or whatever? I mean, sure, I watched horror movies like everyone else, but I always thought that stuff was just fiction. That changed last month in my apartment in Ravenwood. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened, and I honestly don't know if I ever will. My German Shepherd Max has always been pretty independent. He's not really the cuddly type, more of the loyal guardian who keeps his distance but is always watching. That's why his behavior that night struck me as so odd. It started at dinner when I was talking to my roommate and my sister, who was visiting, about how I wished Max was more affectionate. Sometimes I just want him to cuddle up next to me instead of lying at the foot of the bed, I remember saying. My sister laughed and said German Shepherds weren't lapdogs, but I still wished he'd show more affection sometimes. That night, Max was acting weird, like really weird. He kept pacing around my bedroom, stopping to stare at the corners of the ceiling. He'd growl at nothing, which he never does unless there's a legitimate threat. I checked the windows, the closet, under the bed, nothing. I even went outside to see if maybe there was an animal or something that was setting him off. Nothing. When I finally got into bed around 11, Max jumped up too, which was normal, but instead of curling up at my feet like usual, he pressed himself against my side. His ears were perked up, and he kept making this low, rumbling sound in his throat. Not quite a growl, but definitely not normal. "What's wrong, buddy?" I kept asking him, but he just stared at the bedroom door. I checked my phone, scrolled through social media for a bit, and eventually drifted off to sleep with Max still pressed against me. I don't know how long I was asleep when Max's behavior got even stranger. I woke up to find him with his head resting on my chest, something he had never done before, and he was looking at me with these worried eyes. It was so weird that it actually woke me up completely. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:20-something in the morning. I tried to push Max off me, thinking maybe he needed to go out, but he wouldn't budge. He just pressed his head harder against my chest and started making that rumbling sound again. Then things got, I don't even know how to describe it. Terrifying, impossible. I still get chills thinking about it. I felt this pressure on my back, like someone was pressing down on me, but not quite. It was more like a weight that was trying to push inside me rather than just on top of me. Max started growling loudly now, baring his teeth at something behind me. I flipped over quickly, and that's when I saw it. There was this thing hovering above my bed. It wasn't quite solid, more like a patch of darkness that was somehow darker than the unlit room around it. It had this faint glowing outline, like a hazy blue light tracing its edges. It wasn't very tall, maybe 1.5 feet, but it was wide, spanning at least 3 or 4 feet across my bed. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. I blinked hard, expecting it to disappear. It didn't. Instead, it moved closer to me, and I felt that same pressure again, but now on my chest and head. It felt like it was trying to merge with me, enter me. I know how crazy that sounds, but that's the only way I can describe it. I screamed so loud my throat hurt instantly. Max was barking and lunging at the thing, but his teeth seemed to go right through it. The entity didn't react to him at all. It just kept moving toward me. I scrambled backward, falling off the bed and hitting my head on the nightstand. The pain confirmed I was definitely awake. I ran to my bedroom door, but when I grabbed the handle, it wouldn't turn. I'm not talking about it being locked. The handle just wouldn't move, like it was frozen in place. I turned around and the thing was right there, maybe inches from my face. It was so dark that looking at it hurt my eyes, like they couldn't process the absence of light. That's when I noticed it had developed these arm-like appendages that were reaching for me. One of them touched my chest, and I felt this cold so intense it burned. It felt like it was reaching inside my chest, not just touching the surface. My whole body went rigid and I couldn't breathe. Max was going absolutely ballistic, jumping and barking, but he couldn't seem to affect this thing at all. I don't know where I found the strength, but I threw myself at the door again, twisting the handle with everything I had. This time it opened and I practically fell into the hallway. I scrambled to my feet and ran to my roommate's room, pounding on her door. Max was right behind me, still growling and looking back toward my room. My roommate opened her door, looking confused and annoyed until she saw my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, but I couldn't even form words. I was shaking so violently that my teeth were chattering. I just pushed past her and collapsed on her floor. I glanced at her alarm clock, 3:36 a.m. The entire encounter had lasted maybe 5 or 6 minutes, but it felt like hours. "There's something in my room," I finally managed to stammer out. "Something not human." My roommate looked skeptical but concerned. She grabbed her phone for a flashlight and headed toward my room with Max and me following cautiously behind. When she flipped on my bedroom light, everything looked normal. No hovering black entity, no sign that anything unusual had happened. "I swear to God it was there," I told her. "This black smoky thing. It tried to get inside me." She clearly thought I'd had a nightmare, and I almost started to believe it myself. Except for 2 things. Max was still acting protective and weird, staying pressed against me, and I couldn't stop shaking, not just a little trembling, I mean full body shaking that I had absolutely no control over. It didn't stop when my roommate made me some tea. It didn't stop when the sun came up. It lasted for almost 12 hours. I couldn't go back to my room, so I called in sick to work and spent the day on my roommate's couch. My sister came over and they both tried to convince me I'd had a night terror. I almost believed them, except Max wouldn't leave my side, and he kept staring at my bedroom door like he was guarding me from whatever might come out. That evening, I finally worked up the courage to go back to my room. My sister went with me, and we checked every corner, under the bed, in the closet. Nothing. I plugged in a nightlight. I know, childish, but I couldn't bear the thought of being in complete darkness again. I felt a little better with the soft glow filling the room. I was texting my mom about what happened, more just to vent than anything else, when she called me immediately after receiving my message. Her voice sounded strange, tight. "Lily," she said, "do you remember what happened 2 years ago when you were staying at my house?" I didn't, not right away. Then it hit me. I'd woken up terrified in the middle of the night at her house once, babbling about shadows and not being able to move. We'd both written it off as sleep paralysis at the time. "Was it the same thing?" she asked. "A black shape with a glowing edge, trying to get inside you?" My blood ran cold. "How did you know that?" There was a long pause before she said, "Because I've seen it too, twice in my life. The first time when I was about your age, and again about 10 years ago." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My practical, no-nonsense mother had experienced the same thing. "What is it?" I whispered. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know it's evil, pure evil. Both times I felt like it was trying to take over, use my body somehow." We talked for almost an hour. She told me her experiences had been nearly identical to mine, right down to the time, always between 3 and 4 in the morning. The only difference was she'd never had a dog to warn her or protect her. As we were talking, the nightlight I'd plugged in suddenly went out, just completely off. No flickering, no warning. I checked it, still plugged in, bulb intact. It just wouldn't turn back on. I ended up sleeping in my roommate's room again that night. I've been researching non-stop since then. Sleep paralysis, hallucinations, gas leaks, carbon monoxide. I've considered every logical explanation, but none of them account for everything. Max's behavior, the fact that my mom experienced the same thing, the door that wouldn't open, the nightlight failing. The only theory that makes any sense to me is terrifying. I think I woke up too quickly that night. I opened my eyes before my body was fully awake, and I saw something that we're not supposed to see. I think these entities attach themselves to us when we sleep. They use our bodies as vessels, and we never know because we're not conscious when it happens. But that night, I caught one in the act, and it didn't like that. Max sleeps in my bed every night now, his head always on my chest. I've installed a security camera in my room. I keep lights on. I try not to fall asleep until I'm absolutely exhausted, hoping I'll sleep deeply enough that I won't wake up in that vulnerable state between sleeping and waking. But every night, around 3:30, I feel myself starting to wake up. And every night I feel Max press himself closer to me, growling softly at something I can no longer see. Story 10. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that night in Oak Ridge. It's been 5 years, but I can still feel the chill down my spine when I think about it. I've gone through countless paranormal forums and research papers trying to find something, anything that could explain what Jordan and I saw, but I found nothing. I was 19 at the time, visiting my best friend Jordan Chen for the weekend. His family had moved to this old Air Force base that had been converted into civilian housing in Oak Ridge. The neighborhood had this eerie vibe right from the start. The houses were all identical, cookie-cutter military housing from the 70s with faded paint and small yards. Jordan's mom had told us to be careful walking around at night because the streetlights were unreliable, but I didn't think much of it then. When I arrived, Jordan seemed off. He was usually this energetic guy who couldn't sit still, but that day he was quiet, distracted. After we got my stuff settled in his room, we sat on his back porch, and he finally told me what was bothering him. "My mom didn't want to freak you out," he said, picking at a loose thread on his hoodie, "but there's been some weird shit happening around here." Apparently, the base had a history that the real estate agent had conveniently forgotten to mention. Back in the 80s, there had been a string of suicides among the airmen stationed there, 5 in 1 year. The base chaplain had performed some kind of blessing ceremony, and things quieted down. But since the conversion to civilian housing, residents had reported strange occurrences, voices when no one was around, objects moving, and shadowy figures in peripheral vision. "Mom says it's just the old plumbing and our imaginations," Jordan said with a forced laugh. "But last week, I swear I saw someone standing at the end of my bed at like 3 in the morning. When I turned on the light, there was nobody there." I tried to play it cool, but that uneasy feeling had settled in my stomach. I've always been sensitive to this kind of stuff, not psychic or anything, just aware, and something about that house felt wrong, like the air was too thick pressing down on you. We spent the day catching up, playing video games, and trying to ignore the weird vibes. Jordan's mom had the night shift at the hospital, so we ordered pizza and stayed up watching horror movies. Probably not the smartest choice given the circumstances, but we were 19 and stupid. Around midnight, we were deep into some slasher film when we heard it, a soft tap on the back glass door. We both froze. The sound came again, more distinct this time. Tap, tap, tap. "Probably just a branch," I said, but my voice came out shakier than I intended. Jordan paused the movie. "There aren't any trees near the back door." We looked at each other, and I could see my own fear reflected in his eyes. The tapping stopped, but now we were both on edge. Jordan grabbed a baseball bat from his closet, and we crept toward the kitchen where the back door was. The door was all glass with vertical blinds that weren't fully closed. Jordan reached for the light switch, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I whispered. "If someone's out there, we don't want them to see us." We edged closer to the door, peering through the gap in the blinds. At first, I didn't see anything, just the small concrete patio illuminated by the security light. Then I saw her. There was a girl standing on the patio, maybe 15 or 16, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned nightgown. But her face, Jesus, her face was wrong. It was distorted, like someone had taken a knife and I can't even describe it. Parts were missing, parts were twisted. Her eyes were too wide, too dark. Jordan sucked in a breath beside me. "Do you see that?" he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. My heart was hammering so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. We stood frozen, staring at this impossible thing, for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then Jordan's phone rang from the living room, shattering the silence. We both jumped, and I actually yelped. When we looked back through the blinds, the girl was gone. "Holy shit," Jordan breathed, backing away from the door. "Holy fucking shit." The phone kept ringing. Jordan ran to get it. It was his mom checking in. I could hear him trying to keep his voice steady as he assured her everything was fine. I stayed by the door, scanning the patio, and that's when I saw her again. She was at the back of the patio now, near the fence that separated the yard from the alley behind the house. She was turned away from us, but as I watched, she began to rotate, moving in a way that wasn't quite human, too fluid, like she was underwater. I called Jordan back over, my voice barely above a whisper. By the time he returned, she was facing us again, but she didn't approach. She just stood there, staring with those horrible eyes. "We need to call the police," I said. Jordan shook his head. "And tell them what? That there's a ghost on our patio. They'll think we're drunk or high." He had a point, but I wasn't about to go out there and confront whatever this was. We backed away from the door and retreated to the living room, trying to process what we'd seen. We were still arguing about what to do when we heard a car pull into the driveway. Jordan's mom was home early, and she had brought something with her, a massive German shepherd that belonged to her co-worker. "Thought you boys might feel safer with Rex here," she said, unclipping the dog's leash. "My patient canceled, and Diane needed someone to watch him tonight." The dog seemed friendly enough, wagging his tail as he sniffed around the living room. But when he got to the kitchen, his demeanor changed completely. He stopped dead in his tracks, hackles rising along his spine. A low growl rumbled from his chest as he stared at the back door. Jordan and I exchanged looks. The dog could sense it too. Jordan's mum didn't notice, busy unpacking some groceries she'd picked up. "I'm going to head to bed, boys. Don't stay up too late and make sure Rex has water." As soon as she was upstairs, the dog started pacing in front of the back door, occasionally letting out short, aggressive barks. "He knows something's out there," I whispered. Jordan nodded, his face pale. "What do we do?" I don't know what possessed us. Maybe it was stupid teenage bravery or just morbid curiosity. But we decided to investigate. Not by going outside, thank God, but by trying something different. Jordan had been into meditation and what he called spiritual awareness exercises. He suggested we sit on the patio and see if we could sense anything. "You mean like a seance?" I asked skeptically. "No, not calling anything, just being receptive, seeing if we can understand what's happening." It sounded crazy, but so did everything else about that night. We let Rex upstairs with Jordan's mom, figuring she might need the protection more than we did, and stepped onto the patio. The night was cool and still, with a full moon casting everything in silvery light. The girl, or whatever she was gone, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. We sat cross-legged on the concrete, facing the fence that bordered the alley. Jordan closed his eyes and started taking deep breaths, encouraging me to do the same. I tried, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. About 10 minutes in, I heard it, a soft scurrying sound behind the fence, like a rabbit or small animal moving through dry leaves. I kept my eyes closed, thinking it was just wildlife, when I noticed a shadow moving through the slats of the wooden fence, not casting a shadow, being a shadow, darker than the night around it. I wanted to tell Jordan, but he seemed deep in concentration, and part of me was afraid that speaking would somehow make whatever was happening worse. So I sat there, heart pounding, as the shadow moved back and forth along the fence line. Finally, Jordan broke the silence. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, relief washing over me that I wasn't imagining things. Something's moving out there. We both stood up slowly, approaching the fence. It was about 6 feet tall, but there were small gaps between the wooden slats. Jordan was taller than me, so he peered through first. "Holy shit," he breathed. "Marcus, look." I stood on my tiptoes and looked through the gap. The alley behind the house was bathed in moonlight, the gravel path clearly visible. But there, about 10 feet down the alley, was something impossible, a spot of absolute darkness. It wasn't just a shadow or an area the moonlight didn't reach. It was like a hole in reality, a patch of blackness so deep it seemed to absorb the light around it. The darkness had a strange quality to it, almost like it was radiating outward, creating a hazy effect around its edges. As we watched, the dark spot moved slightly, its shape shifting in a way that made my eyes hurt trying to follow it. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a beach ball, but there was something profoundly wrong about it. It didn't belong in our world. "What the fuck is that?" I whispered. Jordan shook his head, his face ghostly in the moonlight. "I don't know, but I think it's what's been causing all the weird shit." The dark spot pulsed slightly, expanding and contracting like it was breathing. A wave of cold washed over me and I felt a pressure in my ears like being underwater. "We should go inside," I said, but Jordan was already reaching for a small garden trowel that was lying near the edge of the patio. "I want to see what happens if—" He didn't finish the sentence before he tossed the trowel over the fence toward the dark spot. The metal tool arced through the air, glinting in the moonlight. As it approached the darkness, something impossible happened. The dark spot moved, not drifted or rolled, but darted sideways with a speed that made my stomach lurch. The trowel hit the gravel where the spot had been a split second before. The darkness paused for a moment, as if considering us, then shot down the alley in a zigzag pattern that defied physics. As it moved, every dog in the neighborhood seemed to start barking at once, a cacophony of panic and alarm that raised the hairs on my arms. In seconds, the dark spot had vanished from sight, but the dogs continued their frantic barking. Jordan and I stood frozen by the fence, struggling to process what we'd just witnessed. "We need to get the trowel," Jordan said after a long silence. "Are you insane? I'm not going out there." But Jordan was already unlatching the gate that led to the alley. "That thing's gone, and I don't want to leave evidence that we were messing around out here." Reluctantly, I followed him into the alley, every nerve in my body screaming danger. The gravel crunched under our feet as we approached where the trowel had landed, except it hadn't just landed. It was stuck, handle up, buried halfway into the hard-packed earth. "That's not possible," I said, staring at it. "The ground is like concrete here. That trowel couldn't have stuck in like that just from being thrown." Jordan pulled it out with some effort, and we hurried back inside, locking every door and window we could find. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every sound. We never saw that specific dark spot again, but the next day, as we walked around the neighborhood trying to clear our heads, we both heard whispers, voices that seemed to follow us just at the edge of comprehension. Jordan moved away a few months later, his mom citing job opportunities elsewhere, but I always wondered if it was because of what happened that night. I've spent years trying to understand what we saw in that alley. Was it a ghost, some kind of interdimensional entity, a manifestation of the base's dark history? I don't have answers, just the memory of that darkness, a blackness so profound it stood out even against the night, moving with impossible speed and purpose. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear that scurrying sound again, like something moving just out of sight, and I wonder if that dark spot is still out there, still watching, still waiting for another chance to reveal itself. Story 11. I've never told this story outside my immediate family, and even then, I've only told parts of it. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that night when I was 14, and typing this out feels like I'm finally acknowledging that it wasn't just some terrible dream. I grew up in Pinecrest, a small rural town where everybody knows everybody else's business. It's the kind of place where the biggest excitement is usually the annual harvest festival, or when someone gets a new tractor. At least that's what I thought until 4 years ago. My great-aunt Mabel had been dating this man named Harold for about 3 years. From the moment I first met him, something felt off. It wasn't anything specific he did. He was polite enough to everyone, brought gifts to family gatherings, helped Aunt Mabel with her garden. but there was something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. They were empty somehow, like looking at a photo where someone's eyes didn't catch the light. Whenever Harold was around, I'd get this cold feeling in my stomach. My mom would always nudge me to be nicer to him, saying I was being rude, but I couldn't help it. There was something about him that felt wrong, like a shadow that stayed even when all the lights were on. The summer I turned 14, Harold died of a heart attack. I remember feeling guilty because my first reaction wasn't sadness, but relief. Aunt Mabel was devastated, of course. She'd found him on the kitchen floor and called an ambulance, but it was too late. What we didn't know then was what Harold had said to her just days before. I only found this out later, after everything happened. Apparently Harold had looked at Aunt Mabel one evening and said, completely out of nowhere, "If anything happens to me, don't let Lily into this house." That's what he said. "Don't let me into the house. Not anyone else in our family. Just me." Aunt Mabel thought it was weird, but didn't mention it to anyone because, well, what do you say to something like that? About a week after the funeral, my parents offered to help Aunt Mabel pack up Harold's things. She decided she didn't want to live alone in that house anymore and was going to stay with us for a while until she figured out what to do. My mom thought it would be good for me to help too, to show support. The moment I stepped into their house, I felt it, a heaviness in the air, like the whole place was underwater. It was the middle of July, but inside it felt like November. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being dramatic, but the feeling followed me from room to room. We were sorting through Harold's clothes when I picked up one of his sweaters and suddenly got so dizzy I had to sit down. My mom asked if I was feeling sick, and I lied and said I'd skipped breakfast. I didn't know how to explain that touching his clothes made me feel like I was touching something that wasn't quite human. The worst part was his study. Harold had converted one of the bedrooms into a small office where he'd spend hours alone. Aunt Mabel never went in there much, saying it was his space. When we opened the door, the cold feeling hit me so hard, I actually stepped back into the hallway. There were books everywhere, not just on shelves, but stacked on the floor, on the desk, some open and face down. Most were normal enough. History books, biographies, some novels. But mixed in were these old leather-bound books with no titles on the spines. My dad picked one up and flipped through it, then put it back down with a weird look on his face. "Let's just box everything up," he said. "Mabel can decide what to do with it all later." I was supposed to help clear the desk, but every time I touched something in that room, my fingers would tingle like they'd fallen asleep. I kept it to myself, though. Everyone was already stressed enough dealing with Aunt Mabel's grief. We finished packing everything up by evening, and Aunt Mabel came home with us. We set her up in our guest room, which was across the hall from mine. That night, I lay awake for hours, unable to shake the feeling that we'd brought something back with us. 3 days later, it happened. I'd finally managed to fall asleep around midnight after finishing a summer reading assignment. I remember checking my phone before drifting off. It was 12:17. I woke up suddenly, completely alert, with that feeling you get when someone's watching you. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:33. I tried to roll over, but I couldn't move, not even my fingers. My heart started racing because I realized I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I'd read about it online but never had it before. I told myself not to panic, that it would pass in a few seconds. That's when I saw it, a figure standing at the foot of my bed. At first I thought it was just a shadow or my eyes playing tricks, but then it moved. It was shaped like a man but somehow wrong. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Where its face should have been was just darkness. Not like it was wearing a mask or hood, but like the darkness was its face. I tried to scream but couldn't make a sound. The figure slowly leaned forward, putting its hands on the foot of my bed. Its fingers were long and bony, pressing down so hard I could feel the mattress dip. Then it spoke. "Get out." The voice wasn't loud, but it seemed to vibrate through my bones. It wasn't like any human voice I'd ever heard. It sounded like multiple voices layered together, some high and some so low they were almost just a rumble. I was crying by this point, tears sliding down the sides of my face into my hair, still unable to move or scream. The figure began to crawl up the bed, moving in a jerky, unnatural way, like watching something on a screen that keeps freezing for split seconds. It crawled until its face, that void where a face should be, was right above mine. "Get out!" it screamed this time, and the force of it felt like it would shatter my eardrums. Then it raised one of those long, wrong hands and struck me across the face. The pain broke whatever paralysis had been holding me. I screamed and thrashed, finally able to move. I reached for the lamp beside my bed, knocking it over in my panic. When the light from the hallway spilled in as my door flew open, there was nothing there. My mom rushed in, asking what was wrong. I was sobbing, trying to explain, when I felt something warm on my cheek. I touched it and my fingers came away red. There was a cut on my face, a real physical cut that was bleeding. My mom freaked out, turning on all the lights, checking under the bed and in the closet. My dad came in too, followed by my brother and Aunt Mabel. Everyone was talking at once, asking what happened, if I'd cut myself somehow in my sleep. That's when I noticed Aunt Mabel's face. She'd gone completely white, staring at the gash on my cheek with recognition in her eyes. Later that night, after everyone else had gone back to bed, my mom insisting on sleeping on my floor just in case, Aunt Mabel came to my room. In whispers, she told me about Harold's warning. She said that in the weeks before his death, he'd been acting strange, staying up all night reading those old books, muttering to himself, drawing symbols on scraps of paper that he'd immediately burn in the fireplace. "I think he brought something back with him," she said. "Something that wasn't supposed to be here." "Brought it back from where?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know, but I think it followed me here to your house." She started crying then. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I didn't believe him. I thought he was just being paranoid. I didn't tell her or anyone else the full story of what I saw that night. I couldn't. My older cousin Tyler was staying with us at the time too. He'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia after coming back from his military service and was having a rough time. The last thing I wanted was for everyone to think I was having hallucinations too, or worse, to trigger one of Tyler's episodes, so I said I must have scratched myself in my sleep during a nightmare. I let them believe that, but I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. That hand striking me was real. Aunt Mabel moved out a week later, saying she didn't want to impose anymore. I think she felt guilty. Before she left, she hugged me tighter than she ever had before and whispered, "Be careful, Lily. Some things we don't understand in this world." The strange thing is, after she left, nothing like that ever happened again. The cut on my face healed, leaving a small scar that's barely visible now. Sometimes I catch myself touching it, making sure it was real. I still don't know what that thing was, or why Harold warned Aunt Mabel to keep me away from their house. Was it something about me specifically that drew it out, or was I just unlucky enough to be the first person it encountered? Every now and then, I wake up at exactly 3:33 in the morning, my heart pounding, convinced there's something standing at the foot of my bed. There never is, at least nothing I can see, but I always feel watched, and sometimes just before I turn on the light, I swear I can hear that voice again, those voices whispering, "Get out." I'm 18 now and leaving for college next month. I've never been so excited to move out of a house in my life. Maybe whatever connection was formed that night will finally be broken when I'm hundreds of miles away. Or maybe it'll follow me. That's what scares me the most. Bigfoots, Story 12. For context, I'm 18 and have been staying with my grandparents on and off since I was 15. My mom's drinking got worse after my dad left, and our house became a place I couldn't stand to be anymore. The constant screaming, the unpredictable moods, the nights I'd find her passed out on the kitchen floor. It really messed me up. My therapist says I have PTSD, anxiety, depression, and borderline personality disorder from all the years of that chaos. Not trying to trauma dump, just explaining why I ended up at my grandparents' place so often. Their house in Maplewood is old, probably built in the 1970s, with those creaky wooden floors and that musty smell old houses have. My room there used to be my dad's childhood bedroom. It's small, with faded blue wallpaper and a twin bed pushed against the wall. There's an old metal desk lamp that's been there since forever, one of those adjustable ones with the bendy neck and the heavy metal base. I should mention that weird stuff has happened to me for years. I'd hear voices sometimes, not like full conversations, but whispers or my name being called when nobody was around. I'd wake up with unexplained scratches, and my nightmares, they're not normal. They're these hyper-realistic lucid dreams where I feel everything. Usually it's me being hurt physically in some way, and I can feel the pain even after I wake up. My grandparents had gone to visit my aunt for the weekend, leaving me alone in the house. I was actually looking forward to the quiet, just me, my laptop, and some peace for once. That night, a Friday in late August, I went to bed around midnight after binging some shows. Nothing unusual happened during the day. I remember checking that the doors were locked, turning off all the lights except the hallway one, old habit from childhood, and settling into bed. I fell asleep pretty quickly. The first time I woke up, I thought someone had physically grabbed my shoulder and yanked me awake. That's what it felt like. A hand gripping my shoulder and shaking me hard. My eyes shot open, and I sat up, heart pounding. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:15 a.m. "Grandpa," I called out, thinking maybe they'd come home early. No answer. The house was completely silent. I was about to lie back down when I heard it. A snapping sound, like someone repeatedly snapping their fingers, but sharper, more aggressive. It seemed to be coming from different points around my bed. First from the corner near the door, then by the window, then at the foot of my bed. It moved around, never staying in one spot. I froze, listening. The snapping continued for maybe 20 seconds, then stopped abruptly. I sat there for another minute, waiting. But nothing happened. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just the house settling or maybe a branch hitting the window, though there wasn't any wind that night. I laid back down and eventually fell asleep again. The second time I woke up was worse. It wasn't just a feeling of being shaken. The entire bed was moving, like someone had grabbed the frame and was rocking it back and forth. I jolted upright, fully awake now, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The clock read 3:45 a.m. The bed continued to shake for a few more seconds after I sat up, then stopped. That's when the snapping sound started again, but louder this time, much louder and faster, like dozens of fingers snapping in rapid succession. It moved around the room in the same pattern, door, window, foot of the bed, but it was more intense, more deliberate. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped it between the bed and the wall. I was too scared to reach down and get it. The snapping continued for maybe a minute before stopping. I sat there in the dark, trying to calm my breathing. I told myself it was just the house, just my imagination, just my brain playing tricks on me because of my disorders. I've had sleep paralysis before, but this felt different. I could move, for one thing, and I was definitely awake. I considered going to sleep in the living room, but that meant walking through the dark house. Somehow staying put seemed safer. I laid back down, pulling the blankets up to my chin, and eventually drifted off again. The third time was the worst. I was yanked awake so violently, it felt like I'd been thrown upward. The bed was shaking hard, like someone was underneath it, pushing up with all their strength. I scrambled to sit up, pressing my back against the headboard. The clock read 4:23 a.m. The shaking continued for several seconds, much longer than before. The entire frame was rattling against the wall. The snapping sounds were back, but they weren't moving around the room anymore. They were closing in, getting closer and closer to the bed. It sounded like they were right at the edge now, inches from where I sat. I could feel sweat running down my back, my breath coming in short gasps. That's when I saw it. A dark shape, about the size of a softball, zoomed across the room. It moved so fast I could barely track it, but I saw it shoot from the foot of my bed directly toward the metal lamp on the desk. There was a loud clang as something hit the lamp, causing it to wobble. The sound was distinctly metallic, like a coin hitting metal. That was it for me. I'd reached my breaking point. Fear turned to anger. The kind of anger you get when you're exhausted and terrified and just want whatever's happening to stop. "Leave me the fuck alone," I shouted into the darkness. "I'm trying to sleep. Get out." I don't know why I did that. It was pure instinct, like when you're pushed too far and finally snap back. I pulled the blankets over my head like a little kid and curled into a ball, shaking and waiting. Nothing happened. The snapping stopped. The bed stopped moving. The house went completely silent. I stayed under those blankets until sunlight started filtering through, afraid that if I peeked out, whatever was there would be waiting. When I finally got up around 7 in the morning, the room looked completely normal. The first thing I did was check the lamp. Based on the metallic sound, I was sure I'd find a coin or something metal that had hit it, but there was nothing. Not on the desk, not on the floor around it. Nothing. I searched every inch of that room. I looked under the bed, in the closet, behind the desk. I checked the windows to see if they were locked. They were. I examined the lamp itself for any marks or dents. None. I spent the rest of the day on edge, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. But nothing else happened. My grandparents came home the next day, and I didn't tell them about it. What would I say? That their house was haunted? That something invisible was snapping and shaking my bed? They'd just worry about my mental health. That's the thing that keeps bothering me. I know I have mental health issues. I know trauma can make you perceive things that aren't there. But this felt real in a way my hallucinations never have. My hallucinations are usually visual distortions or hearing my name called, never physical sensations like being shaken or seeing objects move, and my lucid nightmares always involve me being hurt. This was different. There was no pain, just fear and that sense of being toyed with. My nightmares also don't involve physical objects making noise that I can still remember the exact sound of months later. I've been back to that house several times since then, and nothing like that has happened again. I even slept in the same room, though I kept the light on all night. Part of me wonders if whatever was there that night got what it wanted, to scare me, to make me acknowledge it, something. Maybe telling it to leave worked, or maybe it's just waiting for the next time I'm alone in that house. I haven't told my therapist about this. I'm afraid she'll adjust my medication or think I'm having some kind of psychotic break, but I know what I experienced. The sound of those snaps, the violent shaking, that object hitting the lamp, it was all too real. Sometimes I wake up at exactly 3:15 a.m. now, no matter where I am. And sometimes, just as I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I can hear the faintest snapping sound like fingers just outside my bedroom door. Story 13. I still can't sleep properly after what happened that night at Tyler's mom's house. It's been 3 months and I've gone over every possible explanation in my head. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or any of that supernatural stuff, but what I saw, what we experienced, I can't rationalize it anymore. For context, I'm a 17-year-old high school junior, and Tyler has been my best friend since 6th grade. His parents divorced when we were in middle school, and his mom moved into this old 2-story house in Oakdale, right across from Pinewood Cemetery, like literally across the street. You could see the headstones from Tyler's bedroom window. I never liked that place from day one. Something about it just felt off. Tyler's mom worked night shifts at the hospital as a nurse, so she was gone most weekends from 7 in the evening until around 8 the next morning. She trusted us to watch Tyler's 10-year-old brother Mason while she was at work. We'd been doing this for almost a year, and it had become our routine. Video games, junk food, and staying up way too late. I'd be lying if I said we hadn't noticed weird stuff happening in that house before. The first few weekends, we'd hear footsteps coming up the stairs when we were the only ones awake. Sometimes there'd be bumps or thuds from the second floor when all 3 of us were downstairs. We'd joke about it, tell each other it was just the house settling, but deep down, I think we all knew something wasn't right. After a while, we got used to it. You know how it is. When something scary becomes familiar, it stops being quite so terrifying. We even made up a name for whatever was making the noises. We called it the attic visitor because the sounds often seemed to come from the ceiling above the second floor hallway where there was a small attic space. Tyler's mom never went up there, said it was just storage from the previous owners that she hadn't bothered to clear out. This particular Friday night 3 months ago started like any other. I arrived at Tyler's around 6, brought my overnight bag and my PlayStation controller. Tyler's mom left for work, reminding us to make sure Mason was in bed by 10. We ordered pizza, played Call of Duty, and Mason hung out with us until about 9:30 when he said he was tired and headed upstairs to bed. "Night, squirt," Tyler called after him. "Door closed or open?" "Cracked," Mason answered from the stairway. Mason always slept with his door slightly open and the hallway light on. He wasn't afraid of the dark, he'd insist. He just liked being able to see if he woke up at night. Tyler and I continued gaming until about 1 in the morning. We'd set up our sleeping bags in the living room like always, mainly because neither of us wanted to sleep upstairs alone. We never admitted it, but I think we both felt safer together on the first floor. I got up to use the bathroom before crashing for the night. The downstairs bathroom was being renovated, so I had to use the one upstairs. I wasn't thrilled about it, but it was either that or hold it until morning. The upstairs hallway was dimly lit by a small nightlight plugged into the wall socket. Mason's room was the first door on the left, then the bathroom, then Tyler's mom's room at the end. The stairs faced directly down the hallway, so when you reached the top, you could see all 3 doors. I was about halfway up the stairs when I heard the floor creak. I froze, my hand gripping the banister. That's when I saw what looked like Mason walking from his bedroom to the bathroom. I could make out his silhouette clearly in the dim light, his messy hair, his Batman pajamas, his slight frame. He didn't look at me or acknowledge me, just walked straight into the bathroom and closed the door. I figured he'd woken up to pee, so I waited at the top of the stairs for him to finish. I didn't want to embarrass him by being right there when he came out. I stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, but the bathroom door didn't open again. "Mason," I called softly, not wanting to wake him if he'd somehow fallen asleep in there, as weird as that would be. No answer. I walked to the bathroom door and knocked gently. "Mason, you okay, buddy?" Still nothing. Starting to worry, I turned the knob. The door wasn't locked, and it swung open to reveal nothing. The bathroom was empty. The light was off, and there was no sign anyone had been in there. I flicked on the light switch and checked behind the shower curtain, thinking maybe he was playing a prank. Nothing. A cold feeling washed over me. I distinctly saw Mason walk into this bathroom. I hadn't taken my eyes off the hallway, and the bathroom had no other exit. It was impossible for him to have left without me seeing him. With my heart pounding, I walked over to Mason's bedroom and gently pushed the door open wider. And there he was, sound asleep in his bed, exactly where he should be. The covers were pulled up to his chin, and he was breathing deeply, clearly having been asleep for hours. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't possible. I had just seen him walk into the bathroom. I couldn't have imagined it. The creaking floorboard, the Batman pajamas, his messy hair, it was all so clear. I backed out of the room slowly, leaving his door cracked exactly as it had been. My mind was racing. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I more tired than I thought? But it had seemed so real. I hurried back downstairs, forgetting about needing to use the bathroom entirely. Tyler was zipping up his sleeping bag when I practically stumbled into the living room. "Dude, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, then frowned when I didn't laugh at his joke. "What's wrong?" I told him what had happened, my voice shaking slightly as I described seeing Mason walk into the bathroom, only to find him asleep in bed. Tyler's face went pale. "You're sure it was Mason you saw?" "Positive. Same height, same pajamas, same hair. Who else could it be?" We sat in silence for a moment, neither of us wanting to say what we were thinking. "Maybe you just thought you saw something," Tyler finally suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I know what I saw, Ty." We tried to rationalize it. Maybe Mason had sleepwalked to the bathroom and back to bed in the time it took me to check the bathroom, but I knew that wasn't possible. I hadn't taken my eyes off that hallway. Eventually, we decided to try and sleep, though neither of us felt particularly comfortable anymore. We left the TV on with the volume low, more for the light than anything else. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to a loud thud from upstairs. I checked my phone, 3:17 in the morning. Tyler was already sitting up in his sleeping bag, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded. Then we heard it again. A distinct footstep, then another, moving across the ceiling above us. That would be directly above the living room, in Tyler's mom's bedroom. "Maybe Mason woke up," I suggested, though we both knew that wasn't likely. "I'll go check," Tyler said, but neither of us moved. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving from Tyler's mom's room into the hallway. Finally, I gathered my courage. "We'll both go." We crept up the stairs together, Tyler leading the way with his phone flashlight. The hallway night light was still on, casting that same dim glow. Mason's door was still cracked open, exactly as I'd left it. The footsteps had stopped. Tyler pushed Mason's door open further. His brother was still asleep in the exact same position as when I'd checked earlier. "See? He's fine," Tyler whispered, but the relief in his voice was short-lived as we both heard another creak, this time from above us. We looked up at the ceiling simultaneously, the attic. We'd joked about the attic visitor so many times, but now the joke didn't seem funny anymore. "There's something up there," I whispered. Tyler swallowed hard. "The attic access is in my mom's closet." We stood there for what felt like an eternity, both of us too scared to suggest checking it out, but too curious not to. Finally, Tyler nodded toward his mom's room. We walked down the hallway, our sock-covered feet silent on the carpet. Tyler's mom's room was neat and tidy, everything in its place. The door to her walk-in closet was closed. Tyler hesitated with his hand on the doorknob, then looked at me. "Maybe we shouldn't," he said quietly. As if in response, we heard another thud from above, and then what sounded like something being dragged across the floor. Tyler's face hardened with resolve. "Whatever's up there, I want to know what it is." He opened the closet door. The closet was dark, but Tyler's phone light illuminated rows of neatly hung clothes and shoes organized on a rack. At the back of the closet was a small stepladder positioned under a square hatch in the ceiling, the entrance to the attic. Tyler handed me his phone and climbed up the stepladder. The hatch wasn't locked, just a push-up panel. He took a deep breath and pushed it open, sliding it to the side. Darkness greeted us. Tyler took his phone back and pointed the light up into the opening. All we could see was the underside of the roof and some old boxes stacked nearby. "I need to get a better look," Tyler said, and before I could stop him, he hoisted himself up through the opening. "Tyler, wait!" I started, but he was already pulling himself into the attic. I stood there at the bottom of the ladder, my heart racing. The last thing I wanted was to be left alone in that closet, so I climbed up after him. The attic was small and cramped, with a sloped ceiling that forced us to crouch. It was mostly empty except for some boxes and old furniture covered in dust sheets. Tyler's phone light swept across the space, illuminating years of dust and cobwebs. "I don't see anything," Tyler whispered. Then his light caught something on the far wall. We both froze. It was a small door, maybe 3 feet high, built into the wall of the attic. It looked like it might lead to another section of the attic, or maybe some kind of storage space. "Was that always there?" I asked. Tyler shook his head slowly. "I've never been up here before." We approached the door cautiously. It was made of wood, weathered and old, with a small metal handle. No lock that we could see. "Should we open it?" I asked, though every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there. Before Tyler could answer, we heard Mason's voice calling from downstairs. "Tyler, Cameron, where are you guys?" We looked at each other, suddenly remembering that we'd left Mason alone. What if he woke up and couldn't find us? "We're up here, buddy," Tyler called back. "In Mom's closet. We'll be right down." We heard the sound of small feet running up the stairs, then down the hallway. Mason appeared at the bottom of the stepladder, looking up at us through the attic opening. "What are you doing up there?" he asked, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Just checking something," Tyler said. "Go back to bed. We'll be there in a second." Mason didn't move. I heard noises. Something woke me up. Tyler and I exchanged glances. "What kind of noises?" I asked. "Like someone walking. And I thought I saw—" Mason trailed off. "Saw what?" Tyler prompted. "I thought I saw myself," Mason said quietly, "standing at the end of my bed, but when I sat up there was nobody there. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold attic air. Mason had seen what I had seen, a copy of himself." Before we could respond, the small door across the attic began to rattle, just slightly at first, then more violently, like someone was trying to open it from the other side. We didn't hesitate. Tyler practically jumped down the stepladder, nearly knocking Mason over in the process. I was right behind him. Tyler slammed the attic hatch shut and we all ran downstairs, not stopping until we were in the living room with all the lights on. We spent the rest of the night huddled together on the couch, too afraid to sleep, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. When Tyler's mom came home at 8 the next morning, we were still sitting there, exhausted and terrified. We tried to tell her what had happened, but it sounded crazy even as we said it. She checked the attic herself, but said there was no small door, just the main storage area. She suggested we'd had too much sugar and not enough sleep. But I know what we saw, and in the months since then, Tyler says the noises have gotten worse. Mason has seen himself twice more, always at night, always just for a moment before the apparition vanishes. Tyler's mom still doesn't believe them, but she's agreed to start looking for a new place. I haven't stayed over there since that night. I can't bring myself to, because I know what's in that house. Something that can look like us, sound like us, move like us. Something that waits in the attic and comes down when we're vulnerable. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I see someone who looks exactly like me standing at the foot of my bed, just for a second, before I blink and they're gone. Story 14. I'm not sure why I'm finally writing this down after all these years. Maybe I just need to get it off my chest, or maybe I'm hoping someone else has experienced something similar. I've been holding this inside for almost my entire life, and it's eating me up. I've always been sensitive to things others can't see or hear. Since I was little, I'd catch voices when nobody was around, glimpses of faces in empty rooms, and shadow people in my peripheral vision. My mom used to say I had an overactive imagination, but I knew what I was experiencing was real. The first major incident happened when I was 6 or 7. We were living in this old house in Willow Creek, a small town surrounded by dense forest. It was a creaky 2-story place with wood paneling everywhere, and these weird little nooks and crannies that seemed to go nowhere. My dad had just gotten custody of us kids after my parents split, and we were all adjusting to the new living situation. That night, I remember it was in the middle of winter because the heater was making that clicking sound it always made when it was working overtime. My dad had let us all sleep in the living room. My brothers and sister had built this blanket fort near the TV, and I had my sleeping bag laid out on the floor a few feet away. Dad was crashed on the couch, already snoring after working a double shift at the lumber mill. I had this disco ball nightlight that I was obsessed with. It would spin slowly and project little colored dots all over the ceiling and walls. I remember lying there watching the lights dance across the room when everything just changed. It's hard to explain, but it was like someone had suddenly turned the volume down on the whole world. The heater stopped clicking. My dad's snoring disappeared. Even the wind outside the windows went silent. Complete stillness. At first I thought maybe I'd gone deaf. I remember wiggling my fingers in my ears, trying to hear something, anything. But then it started. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was impossibly deep. like if you took the lowest bass note you've ever heard and dropped it another few octaves. It didn't hurt my ears exactly, but I could feel it in my chest, like standing too close to a big speaker at a concert. I wish I could say I was brave, but I wasn't. I was frozen, completely paralyzed with fear. I couldn't even call out to my dad, who was literally 6 feet away from me. The voice wasn't shouting, but it filled the entire room like it was coming through the walls themselves. I can't repeat what it told me. I promised I wouldn't. And it's the one promise I've never broken in my entire life. The voice spoke to me for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. It knew things about me, about my family, about stuff that hadn't even happened yet. Some of it made no sense at the time, but over the years, those pieces have fallen into place in ways that still make my skin crawl. The last thing it said before everything went back to normal was a warning. It told me to never, ever tell anyone what it had shared with me. Not my family, not my friends, not even write it down. It said there would be consequences. And then just like that, the world came rushing back. The heater clicking, Dad snoring, wind against the windows. I never mentioned it to anyone, not once. I convinced myself it was just a weird dream or my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew better. Life went on. We moved away from Willow Creek when I was 15. I graduated high school, got a job in construction, and eventually started working pipeline jobs that took me all over the country. The experiences with voices and shadows faded as I got older, to the point where I almost forgot about them entirely. Almost. Then came May of 2020. I was working a job in West Texas, staying in this dingy extended stay motel on the outskirts of a tiny oil town, the kind of place with paper-thin walls and a perpetual smell of cigarettes, no matter how many times they claimed to have cleaned the rooms. I'd been there about 3 weeks, working 12-hour shifts in the blistering heat, coming back to my room only to shower, eat something from the vending machine, and pass out. On this particular night, I remember checking my phone before going to sleep. It was just after 11:30. I dozed off almost immediately, exhausted from the day's work. That's when I had my first nightmare since childhood. I was back in that Willow Creek house in the living room, but it was empty. No furniture, no people, just bare walls and that disco ball nightlight spinning in the corner, casting those colored dots everywhere. But instead of dancing, the dots were moving purposefully, gathering together on the walls to form words I couldn't quite read. I was trying to make sense of them when the dream shifted. I woke up, or thought I did, but couldn't move. Sleep paralysis. I'd heard about it, but never experienced it before. My eyes were open, and I could see my motel room dimly lit by the parking lot lights filtering through the thin curtains. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, completely unable to move anything except my eyes. That's when I felt it, breathing against the back of my neck, slow, deliberate breaths that didn't sound human. They were too measured, too deep. I tried to scream, to move, to do anything, but my body wouldn't respond. Then I saw it. A hand reaching over me from behind. It was impossibly long and dark, not like dark skin, but like it was made of shadows. The fingers were elongated, at least twice the length they should be, and they moved with a fluidity that defied how joints should work. This hand slowly moved toward my neck, and I was certain I was about to die. But the hand stopped, hovering just an inch from my throat. It stayed there for what felt like an eternity before slowly withdrawing. In my peripheral vision, I caught a glimpse of a tall silhouette moving away from my bed and toward the door of my motel room. It didn't open the door, it just sort of faded through it. The moment it disappeared, I could move again. I sat bolt upright, my entire body drenched in cold sweat, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I fumbled for the light switch and sat with my back against the headboard for the rest of the night, too terrified to go back to sleep. I knew instantly what had visited me. It was the same entity from my childhood, making contact after all these years of silence. I don't know why it chose that moment, that random motel in Texas, to find me again, but I'm certain it was the same presence I encountered in Willow Creek. The next day at work, I was a mess. My co-workers asked if I was sick, and I blamed it on food poisoning from the gas station burrito I'd had for dinner. I couldn't exactly tell them I'd been visited by some kind of supernatural entity that had been following me since childhood. I requested room change that night, making up some story about a leak in the bathroom. The motel manager was annoyed but moved me to the other end of the building. It didn't help. For the remaining 2 weeks of that job, I slept with the lights on and woke up multiple times each night, feeling like something was watching me from the corners of the room. Since that night in Texas, I haven't had direct communication with whatever this entity is, but I can sense it nearby more often. It's like once that door was reopened, it never fully closed again. I'll be driving and catch a glimpse of something tall and dark in my rearview mirror that disappears when I look directly at it. Or I'll be in the shower and hear that deep voice just below the sound of running water, not saying anything intelligible, just present. A buddy of mine who's into spiritual stuff says I might be what they call a sensitive, someone with a natural connection to the spirit world. He suggested I try to communicate with whatever this is, to ask it what it wants, but I can't bring myself to do that. The warning it gave me as a child is still crystal clear in my memory, and I've kept that promise for almost 30 years now. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has experienced something similar. If there are others out there who've been visited, who've been told things they can never repeat. I wonder if they're as haunted by the knowledge as I am. I'm 42 years old now, and I've never told anyone about this until writing it here. Not my ex-wife during our 8 years of marriage, not my closest friends, nobody. It feels strange to finally acknowledge it, even in this anonymous way, but I need to know if I'm alone in this or if others have had similar experiences. The weird thing is, even after all these years, I still remember every word that entity told me in that living room in Willow Creek. Every single word, and some of those things it predicted, they've come to pass exactly as it said they would. Things about my life, about the world, things no one could have possibly known. I still don't know what it is or what it wants from me, but I know it's real, and I know it's still out there, watching, waiting. For what? I don't know. All I know is that when it reached for my neck in that Texas motel room and then stopped, it felt like a reminder that it could find me anytime, anywhere, and that's the part that keeps me up at night. Story 15. Have you never really believed in ghosts or anything supernatural before? I mean, I'd watch scary movies and all that, but I always figured it was just made-up stuff to freak people out. But something happened to me last month that I still can't explain, and I just need to get it off my chest. I'm 10 years old and started middle school this year at Maplewood Central. It's been pretty normal so far. New teachers, harder homework, the usual stuff. One of the classes I was actually looking forward to was PE, because our school has this huge indoor pool, and I've always loved swimming. On September 12th, we had our second swimming class of the year. Coach Benson was teaching us different breathing techniques and had us practice holding our breath underwater. I've always been pretty good at holding my breath. Last summer, I made it to 58 seconds at my cousin's pool, so I was excited to show off a little. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and pushed myself to the bottom of the pool. The water was cold against my skin, and everything got quiet except for that weird muffled sound you hear underwater. I crossed my legs and sat at the bottom, watching bubbles float up from my nose. I remember being able to see the blurry shapes of other kids swimming above me, but nobody was close by. I was counting in my head, 23, 24, 25, and starting to feel that tightness in my chest. I was pushing out small amounts of air to stay down longer. The chlorine made my eyes sting a little, but I kept them open, determined to beat my personal record. That's when it happened. Clear as day, I heard a voice. Not like when someone yells underwater and it sounds all garbled. This was crystal clear, like someone was sitting right next to me at the bottom of the pool. It was definitely a young kid's voice, maybe even younger than me. Please breathe. Just those 2 words, but they weren't muffled or distorted by the water at all. They sounded normal. like someone had spoken directly into my ear. I freaked out, my whole body jerked, and I kicked off from the bottom so fast I practically flew out of the water. I came up gasping and looking around frantically. I remember Coach Benson asking if I was okay, and I just nodded, too shaken to explain what had just happened. None of my classmates were anywhere near me underwater. The closest kid was Tyler, who was at least 15 feet away practicing his backstroke. There was absolutely no way anyone could have spoken to me down there. After class, while we were changing in the locker room, I told my best friend Jake about what happened. We've been friends since second grade, and he's never been the type to make fun of me. "Dude, that's super weird," he said, looking genuinely freaked out. "You sure you didn't imagine it?" "I'm positive," I said. It was so clear, like someone was right next to me. "Maybe it was just the pressure in your ears or something," Jake suggested, but I could tell he was as creeped out as I was. "No way, it was a real voice, a little kid's voice." I remember getting goosebumps just talking about it. Jake and I tried to come up with logical explanations the rest of the day. Maybe someone had jumped in the pool near me and I didn't notice. Maybe the school's PA system had gone off and somehow sounded clear underwater. None of it made sense. I didn't tell my parents because I knew they'd just say I was making it up for attention or something. My mom's always telling me I have an overactive imagination whenever I talk about stuff like this. I tried to forget about it, but for the next few days I kept thinking about that voice. It wasn't scary exactly, more like concerned, like whoever said it was worried about me. The words kept repeating in my head, "Please breathe." Fast forward to a week later. My dad was supposed to pick me up after school, but he texted saying he'd be late because of traffic. Usually I wait out front, but it was really hot that day, so I decided to hang out near the gym where there's more shade. I'd never really explored that side of the school before. There's this little garden area behind the pool building with a couple of benches and some plants. I was just wandering around, kicking rocks and killing time, when I noticed something partly hidden behind a bush. It was a small memorial stone, about the size of a textbook, set into the ground. I knelt down and brushed away some leaves to read it. There was a name engraved on it, Zerky Rainey. Below the name was a short inscription that said something like, "Forever in our hearts," and 2 dates. I remember thinking it was sad that someone had a memorial at our school. Was it a student who died? A teacher? I took out my phone and snapped a picture of it, then sent it to Jake with the message, "Check out what I found behind the pool." Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed with his reply, "Look at the death date." I zoomed in on the photo and felt this cold shiver run down my spine. The date of death was September 12th, the exact same day I heard the voice underwater, this year. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely type. I sent Jake back, "That's the same day I heard the voice." He called me immediately, and I walked away from the memorial to answer. "Dude, that's insane," Jake said, his voice tight with excitement and fear. "That can't be a coincidence." "I know," I whispered, glancing back at the stone. "But who is Zerky Rainey? I've never heard that name before." "Hold on, I'm Googling it," Jake said. I waited, pacing back and forth, half expecting my dad to pull up any minute. Part of me was freaking out, but another part was weirdly calm, like pieces of a puzzle were finally clicking together. "Oh man," Jake finally said. "I found something. Zerky Rainey was a little kid who died right there at that spot. He was only 4 years old." My stomach dropped. 4? How did he die? It says he was run over by a truck. His dad was a teacher or something. Wait, there's more. His dad wrote a book about him called Letters to Zerky. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A 4-year-old boy had died right where I was standing, and somehow I'd heard his voice underwater exactly on the anniversary of his death. But why would he tell me to breathe? I asked, more to myself than to Jake. Maybe ... Jake hesitated. "Maybe he thought you were drowning. You were holding your breath underwater, right? A 4-year-old might not understand you were just practicing." That explanation hit me like a ton of bricks. A little kid who had died tragically was worried about me dying too. He was trying to save me. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I wasn't in any real danger in the pool. Coach Benson was watching us, and I wasn't anywhere close to actually drowning. But Zerky couldn't have known that. He just saw a kid underwater not breathing and got worried. "I gotta go," I told Jake quickly as I spotted my dad's car pulling into the parking lot. "I'll call you later." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Zerky, this little 4-year-old boy who died way too young, and how his spirit or whatever was still at the school, watching over kids like me. I didn't feel scared anymore, just sad for him and weirdly protective, like I needed to make sure people remembered him. The next day, I went to the school library during lunch and asked the librarian if they had the book, Letters to Zerky. She looked surprised, but showed me where it was. It turned out the book was written by Zerky's dad about their family travels before the accident. There was a photo of Zerky on the back cover, a little boy with a big smile and curly hair. I checked out the book and read parts of it that night. Zerky seemed like such a happy, curious kid. His dad wrote about how he loved exploring new places and making friends wherever they went. It made what happened to him even more heartbreaking. I've gone back to that memorial stone a few times since then. Sometimes I just sit on the bench nearby and do my homework. Once I even brought a small toy car and left it by the stone, but the groundskeeper must have removed it later. I haven't heard Zerky's voice again, not in the pool or anywhere else. But sometimes when I'm swimming and I go underwater, I feel this strange sense of being watched over, not in a creepy way, but like someone's looking out for me. I know this all sounds crazy. Before it happened to me, I probably wouldn't have believed it either, but I know what I heard that day, and now I know why I heard it. A little boy who lost his life too soon saw me underwater and got worried. His only thought was to help me, to make sure I would breathe and be okay. I haven't told anyone except Jake, and now you guys. My parents would probably just send me to a therapist or something, but I know what I experienced was real. Sometimes I wonder if Zerky is still there, watching over all the kids at school. I like to think he is, and if I ever hear his voice again, I won't be scared. I'll just say, thank you. Story 16, and my best friend Nolan died from a drug overdose back in 2020. We'd been friends since middle school. He was the brother I never had. Finding out he was gone absolutely destroyed me. I remember getting the call from his mom, her voice breaking as she told me. I just sat on my kitchen floor for hours, unable to process it. He'd been struggling with addiction for years, and there were times I thought he was getting better. But then he'd disappear for weeks and come back looking worse than before. When Emma and I got engaged last year, planning the wedding brought all those feelings back. Nolan should have been my best man. There was never any question about that. Even though he was gone, I kept a spot for him in the wedding party. Emma thought it was a bit strange at first, but she understood how important he was to me. I even bought groomsmen gifts for everyone, including one for Nolan that I planned to give to his dad after the ceremony. Just a nice watch with an engraving that said, "Brothers Forever." I kept it in my desk drawer, sometimes taking it out when I was alone. About 6 months before our wedding, which was set for September of 2024, our cat Jasper got sick. Nothing serious, just needed some routine care, but our regular vet had closed down. Emma found this place about 20 minutes from our apartment that had good reviews, so we switched. During Jasper's first appointment, I was filling out paperwork when I noticed a photo on the wall of the staff from like 15 years ago, and there, standing with his family and their dog, was Nolan. I asked the receptionist about it, and she confirmed they'd been coming there since Nolan was a kid. What are the odds, right? But it gets weirder. When I told Emma about it later, she asked what kind of dog Nolan had. I told her it was a golden retriever named Jasper. Yes, the same name as our cat. Emma looked at me like I was playing some kind of sick joke. I wasn't. I'd completely forgotten that Nolan's childhood dog had the same name as our cat. Emma had named Jasper before she even met me, let alone Nolan. It was just a bizarre coincidence, but it gave me goosebumps. About 2 weeks after we started going to that vet, Nolan's dad called me. He sounded freaked out. He said he'd been getting automated text messages and emails from the vet's office about appointments for Jasper, his dog that had died nearly 10 years ago. The messages started coming out of nowhere, reminding him about heartworm medication and annual checkups. He'd called the vet's office and they couldn't explain it. Their system showed Jasper had been marked as deceased years ago, but somehow the automated messages had started up again. When he found out we'd just switched to that same vet and that our cat had the same name as his dog, he got really quiet. Then he said something that sent chills down my spine. "Marcus, I think Nolan is trying to reach out to us." I didn't know what to say. I'm not a religious person and I've never believed in ghosts or anything like that, but the timing was so strange. We were 4 months away from the wedding where I'd saved a spot for his son. The vet office looked into it more and said it must have been a glitch in their new computer system, but they couldn't explain why it only happened with Jasper's records. They apologized and fixed it, but Nolan's dad remained convinced. He asked me if anything unusual had happened to me, and I told him about the dreams. I'd been dreaming about Nolan almost every night since we switched vets. Nothing dramatic, just mundane stuff like us hanging out or talking. In the dreams, he never mentioned being dead or anything supernatural. We just picked up like no time had passed. I'd wake up feeling like he was still around, then reality would hit me all over again. The wedding came and went. It was beautiful, but bittersweet. We had a photo of Nolan on what would have been his chair, and I mentioned him in my speech. His parents came and I gave his dad the watch afterward. He cried and hugged me for what felt like forever. I thought maybe that would bring some closure, but the dreams about Nolan continued. Then, in November, around my birthday, I had a dream unlike any of the others. It felt so real that even now, weeks later, I can recall every detail. In the dream, Nolan and I were moving. Not from any place I recognized, just generic houses. We were packing boxes, joking around like we used to. Everything felt normal except for this weird sense of urgency, like we were running out of time. I remember thinking in the dream that we needed to finish before dark, though I didn't know why. I carried some boxes outside to load into a car. When I turned around to go back inside, Nolan was standing on the sidewalk. He wasn't helping with the boxes anymore. He was just standing there in a suit, the same navy blue suit I'd picked out for my groomsman, and he was holding a small wrapped package that I instantly recognized as the groomsman gift. He didn't say anything. He just smiled at me, that same crooked smile he always had, and held up the like he was showing it to me. Then he turned and started walking away. I tried to call out to him, but no sound came out. I tried to run after him, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like they were glued to the ground. I struggled and struggled, but couldn't take a single step. All I could do was watch as he walked farther and farther away, still holding that package, until he turned a corner and disappeared. I woke up crying, not just a few tears. I was sobbing uncontrollably. Emma was shaking me awake, looking terrified. She said I'd been making this awful moaning sound in my sleep. I told her about the dream, and we stayed up the rest of the night talking about Nolan. I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened. It wasn't just a dream. It was different. I felt like he had actually been there with me. The next day I called Nolan's dad and told him about the dream. There was a long silence on the phone, and then he told me something that made my blood run cold. The night before, the vet system had sent him one final message about Jasper. It simply read, "Your friend has completed their journey. No further appointments needed." The vet had no record of sending it. It's been almost 3 weeks since then. The dreams have stopped. No more messages from the vet, but I can't stop thinking about what it all means. Was Nolan really trying to communicate with us? Did he somehow know I'd kept a place for him at the wedding? Was he thanking me for the gift? I keep thinking about how in the dream he was walking away from me, not with anger or sadness, but with purpose. Like he was heading somewhere he needed to be, and I couldn't follow him. Maybe that was the point. Emma thinks the stress of the wedding and my grief over Nolan combined to create these experiences. The logical part of me agrees with her. The coincidences with the vet and our cat could just be that, coincidences. The computer glitch could have been just a glitch. The dream could have been my subconscious working through my feelings. But there's another part of me that can't accept that explanation, because in that dream, when Nolan smiled at me, I felt a sense of peace I haven't felt since before he died. It was like he was telling me it was okay to move on, that he was okay wherever he is now. I've never written any of this down before. I'm not sure why I'm doing it now. Maybe I just need to put it out there to see if anyone else has experienced something similar. Or maybe I just need to tell someone who won't look at me like I'm losing my mind. I miss my friend every day. I wish he could have stood beside me at my wedding. I wish I could call him when I'm having a bad day or share good news with him. But if that dream was really him saying goodbye, at least I got that. At least I got to see him one more time. Whatever happened, whether it was all in my head or something more, I'm grateful for it. And I'm grateful that wherever Nolan is now, he knows he'll always have a place in my life. Story 17. I'm the mother of the Peterson family, and I need to get this off my chest because I don't know who else to tell. My husband thinks we should just move on, but I can't shake what happened in that house. It's been 8 months since we left, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about that basement. We were so excited when we found the place. A beautiful century-old Victorian with original hardwood floors, stained glass windows, and enough bedrooms for our 3 kids to each have their own space. The price was surprisingly reasonable. Red flag number 1 that I completely missed. After months of house hunting in a brutal market, it felt like we'd finally caught a break. Moving day was chaos as usual. The kids were running around claiming bedrooms while my husband Dave and I directed the movers. I remember it was around 2 in the afternoon when Dave called me to the basement door. "Hey Jen, come look at this," he said, pointing to a heavy-duty padlock on the basement door. The realtor never mentioned this. It wasn't just any padlock, this thing was serious, like something you'd see on a storage unit. Dave tried calling the realtor, but she didn't pick up. We had all our stuff arriving and needed the basement for storage, so Dave just grabbed bolt cutters from his toolbox. The lock fell away with a loud clank that I swear echoed through the entire house. The basement door creaked open, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. The light bulb at the top of the stairs didn't work, so Dave used his phone flashlight as we made our way down. The basement was mostly empty, just some old shelves and a workbench. But on the far wall was this massive black pentagram painted directly onto the concrete. It wasn't some teenager's attempt at being edgy. This thing was meticulously done, with strange symbols I didn't recognize around the edges. "What the hell?" Dave whispered, moving closer to examine it. That's when I noticed an envelope taped to the wall next to it. Inside was a handwritten letter that made my stomach drop. "To whoever finds this, I'm sorry for what I've left behind. I began practicing what I thought was harmless witchcraft in this basement. I was wrong. I opened something I couldn't close. It started small. Noises, cold spots, items moving. Then it got worse. I had to leave. The lock is there for a reason. I'm sorry. Catherine." Dave laughed it off. "Some people are nuts," he said, crumpling the note. "Probably the reason she sold the place." I wasn't laughing. Something about that pentagram made my skin crawl, but Dave insisted it was just paint. The next day, he bought primer and paint to cover it up. It took 3 coats of primer to cover that pentagram. 3. And even then, you could still see a faint outline. Dave was frustrated, muttering about cheap paint and porous concrete. But I knew something wasn't right. The paint just wouldn't stick properly over the symbols. We moved in anyway. The first week was uneventful, just the normal stress of unpacking and settling in. Then our middle child, Zach, asked who the little girl was that he'd seen in the hallway. "We don't have a little girl. Our youngest is a boy, and our oldest, Emma, was 16 at the time." I brushed it off as imagination. Kids see things, right? But then came the noises. At first, it was just occasional thumps that we attributed to the house settling. Old houses make noise, we told ourselves. But soon it was more, the sound of children giggling when all our kids were at school. Cabinet doors slamming shut in the kitchen when no one was there. The dog barking at empty corners. One morning, about 3 weeks after moving in, I went down to the basement to grab some winter clothes we'd stored there. The pentagram was visible again, not just an outline, but dark black lines pushing through the fresh paint. I called Dave down to see, and even he couldn't explain it. Maybe there's something in the paint they used, he suggested weakly. Oil-based or something that keeps bleeding through. He repainted it that weekend with heavy-duty paint designed for garage floors. 2 days later, it was back. The activity in the house escalated. Pictures would fall off walls for no reason. Our youngest would wake up screaming about the shadow lady standing by his bed. The dog refused to enter certain rooms. We'd find doors open that we'd definitely closed. Emma, our oldest, started sleeping with her lights on. She said she felt like someone was watching her. Dave and I were sleeping terribly too, constantly waking up at 3:15 in the morning, almost on the dot. After a particularly bad night where all the kitchen cabinets were found open in the morning, I convinced Dave we needed help. I contacted a local priest, Father Thomas, who agreed to come bless the house. I deliberately didn't tell him about the pentagram. I wanted to see what he'd pick up on his own. Father Thomas arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with kind eyes but a serious demeanor. He brought holy water and other items for the blessing. We started in the living room, and he seemed fine, just going through the motions. But when we reached the hallway leading to the basement door, he stopped abruptly. His expression changed completely. "What's down there?" he asked, staring at the basement door. When I told him it was just the basement, he shook his head. "There's something. I need to see it." He walked directly to the basement door like he was being pulled there. Dave and I exchanged looks, but followed him down. When Father Thomas saw the pentagram, now fully visible despite our painting efforts, he crossed himself. "How long has this been here?" he asked, his voice tight. We explained everything, the lock, the letter, our attempts to cover it up. He listened quietly, then told us this wasn't a typical blessing situation. He said the pentagram appeared to be a doorway of sorts, and that the previous occupant had opened something she shouldn't have. Father Thomas performed a more intensive blessing than I think he'd originally planned. He focused particularly on the basement, sprinkling holy water on the pentagram and reciting prayers in Latin. By the time he finished, it was early evening and he looked exhausted. "I've done what I can," he told us. "The presence should be weakened, but..." He hesitated. "If things get worse, call me immediately, and maybe consider having your family stay elsewhere until we can perform a more formal ritual." For about 2 weeks after Father Thomas's visit, things were better. The pentagram stayed covered. The noises stopped. We started to relax, thinking maybe it was over. Then Dave's mother got sick, and we planned a weekend trip to visit her, all except Emma, who had a major exam to study for and convinced us she'd be fine staying behind. She was 16, responsible, and had always been mature for her age. We left Friday afternoon, planning to return Sunday evening. Emma called me Saturday night around 11:30. I'll never forget the terror in her voice. "Mom," she whispered, "there's something in my room." My heart dropped. "What do you mean, honey?" "There's this darkness in the corner. It's not normal darkness. It's like darker than dark, and Rufus sees it too." Rufus was our German shepherd. Emma said he was standing at the foot of her bed, hackles raised, growling at the corner of her room. I told her to turn on the lights, which she did. She said the darkness disappeared and Rufus calmed down. I suggested she keep the lights on and tried to reassure her it was just shadows playing tricks, but I didn't believe that myself. Emma called back 20 minutes later, completely hysterical. She tried turning the lights off again to sleep, and the darkness had returned, bigger this time. She said Rufus went crazy, barking and lunging toward the corner before suddenly yelping and backing away like he'd been hurt. "I'm getting out of here," she sobbed. "I'm going to grab my keys and sleep in my car." I told her to go to her friend Jess's house instead, which was just a few blocks away. Dave and I decided to drive back immediately, even though it was the middle of the night. What Emma told us when we got home the next morning still haunts me. As she'd grabbed her keys and rushed out of her bedroom, she'd looked back and seen her entire bedroom window pitch black. Not like night, but like it was filled with something solid. And as she drove away, she swears she saw a face pressed against her bedroom window. Not a human face, but something else, something wrong. We called Father Thomas again, and this time he brought 2 other priests. They performed a more extensive ritual in the house, focusing on the basement. Father Thomas also had the pentagram physically removed. They chipped out the section of concrete wall where it was painted and disposed of it through some kind of special process. Even after all that, we couldn't stay. Emma refused to sleep in the house, and honestly, none of us felt safe there anymore. We moved out the following week, breaking our lease and taking the financial hit. The worst part, I drove by the house last week and saw a sold sign in the yard. A new family will be moving in, and they have no idea what's waiting for them in that basement. I thought about leaving a note or something, but who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy. Sometimes I wonder if we should have left that basement locked, if we should have respected the warning left by Catherine. But how were we supposed to know? It was just a locked door in our new home. I still have nightmares about that pentagram seeping through the paint, like something alive and determined to be seen. And sometimes, right as I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear children giggling in the hallway. Story 18. I've never told this story to anyone outside of my wife. I still can't explain what happened, and I'm not even sure I want to. What I do know is that something or someone saved my life back in late 2016, and it's haunted me ever since. For context, I was a deputy sheriff in Sacramento County for almost 9 years. By the time this happened, I was 33 and honestly burned out. The job wasn't what I thought it'd be when I first pinned on the badge. I'd seen too much by then. Too many domestics, too many overdoses, too many bodies. I was just going through the motions, counting days until I could figure out what else to do with my life. It was a Tuesday night in November, cold and drizzly. I was working patrol, solo unit, about 4 hours into my shift. Dispatch sent me to a Safeway on the east side for a domestic situation. Pretty routine, couple fighting in the parking lot, possible assault. I remember being annoyed because it was almost my meal break, and these calls never wrap up quickly. When I pulled up, I spotted them immediately, a man and woman arguing near the entrance. I recognized the signs before I even got out of my vehicle. The guy had the distinct tattoos and clothing style of a Norteño gang member, red shirt under his jacket, specific markings on his hands. I dealt with enough gang-related incidents to spot the affiliations immediately. I approached carefully, keeping my distance until I could assess the situation. The woman was crying, mascara running down her face. The guy was agitated, pacing and gesturing wildly. Standard procedure is to separate them, so I called for backup and then got them apart from each other. I took the female to my patrol car while keeping the male in view near the store entrance. She gave me her story. Boyfriend got angry when she was texting a male friend, grabbed her arm hard enough to leave marks, threatened her. Pretty straightforward domestic violence case. I got her information and went to speak with the boyfriend. This is where things get, I don't even know how to describe it. Weird doesn't cover it. Impossible maybe. I approached the guy, who was leaning against the wall smoking a cigarette. He was calm now, too calm actually, giving me that dead-eyed stare I'd seen 1,000 times from gang members. I started my standard questions, keeping a comfortable distance, positioned slightly to his side. Basic officer safety stuff that was second nature by then. I'd been talking to him for maybe 2 minutes when it happened. Clear as day, I heard a woman's voice inside my head. Not like a thought or my conscience talking to me. This was different. It was like someone was standing right next to me, speaking directly into my ear, but there was nobody there. The voice simply said, "Turn around." That's it, just those 2 words. But the voice, it was beautiful, calming, but urgent at the same time. I can still hear it perfectly when I close my eyes. Here's the really messed up part. The instant I heard the voice, my entire life flashed before my eyes. Not in the slow, detailed way people describe near-death experiences. This was fast. Snapshots of my childhood, academy graduation, wedding day, all in a fraction of a second. Then, at the end of this bizarre life review, I saw something that hadn't happened yet. Me, lying face down on the wet pavement, blood pooling around my head from a gunshot wound to the back of my skull, and I saw who did it. A Hispanic male, early 20s, wearing a black Raiders jacket, white t-shirt, and dark jeans. All of this, the voice, the life review, the vision, happened in maybe 2 seconds of real time. I didn't even break stride in my conversation with the suspect, but something in me just reacted. I turned around, and there he was, exactly as I had seen in my vision. Same guy, same clothes, same everything. He was about 15 yards away, walking directly toward us with his right hand concealed under his jacket, his eyes locked on me. My training kicked in. I shifted position, placed my hand on my weapon, and called out, "Sir, I need you to stop right there and show me your hands." He froze. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. His eyes darted to the norteño I was interviewing, then back to me, then to the patrol car where his girlfriend was sitting. "This doesn't concern you," I said firmly. "I need you to leave the area now." He hesitated, then slowly backed away, keeping his hand under his jacket. He disappeared around the corner of the building. My backup still hadn't arrived, so I quickly moved the norteño suspect to a different position where I could better control the situation and see more of my surroundings. I tried to focus on completing my interview, but I was rattled. What the hell had just happened? Was I losing my mind? I've never believed in psychic phenomena or supernatural stuff. I'm a facts and evidence guy. It's why I became a cop. The next few minutes passed in a blur as I tried to process what had happened while still doing my job. Then about 5 minutes later, I heard it again. Turn around. The same voice, the same beautiful, urgent tone. No life review this time, just the command. And again, I reacted without thinking. I spun around, and there he was, the same guy in the Raiders jacket, approaching from a different angle this time. But now he was much closer, maybe just 7 or 8 yards away. His right hand was definitely under his jacket, and I could see the outline of what looked like a pistol grip. This time I drew my weapon and took a defensive position. "Stop! Show me your hands now!" I shouted. The suspect immediately backed up, then turned and ran when he heard the sirens of my approaching backup. I wanted to pursue him, but I couldn't leave my domestic violence suspect or the victim. This is one of my biggest regrets, not detaining him. I should have at least tried to get my backup to locate him, but I was so shaken by what had happened that I didn't even mention it in my radio traffic. When my backup arrived, we completed the domestic violence investigation. I arrested the boyfriend for battery and criminal threats, standard procedure. I never told my fellow deputies about the voice or the guy in the Raiders jacket. What would I say? Hey, a ghost told me someone was about to execute me. They'd have thought I was having a mental breakdown. The rest of the shift went by in a daze. I kept trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe I'd seen the guy in peripheral vision and my subconscious warned me. Maybe I'd picked up on subtle cues from the domestic violence suspect, a change in his eyes or body language that alerted me to an accomplice. That's what I tried to tell myself, but it didn't explain the voice. It didn't explain how I knew exactly what the guy would look like before I turned around. When I got home the next morning, I broke down telling my wife, "I'm not an emotional guy. The job beats that out of you pretty quick." But I couldn't stop shaking. She believed me without question, which somehow made it harder to process. Part of me wanted her to tell me I was overworked and imagining things. I looked through gang intelligence reports for the next several weeks, trying to identify the guy in the Raiders jacket. I never found him. I requested extra patrols near my home for a while, installed better security systems, and became hyper-vigilant about watching my surroundings. Nothing ever came of it. No further incidents, no explanation. I left the sheriff's department about 8 months later, told everyone it was for better opportunities, but the truth is, I couldn't reconcile what happened that night with my understanding of reality. Every time I put on the uniform after that, I'd remember the voice and wonder if today would be the day I'd hear it again. It's been almost 7 years now and I still don't have answers. Was it divine intervention, some kind of psychic ability that manifested in a moment of danger, a hallucination that coincidentally saved my life? I don't know. What I do know is that without that voice, I would have been executed that night. The guy was coming to kill me. I'm certain of it. Maybe it was a gang initiation, maybe revenge for some arrest I'd made, maybe just opportunity. Doesn't matter. He was there to put a bullet in the back of my head, and somehow, something warned me. I still hear that voice sometimes in my dreams, just those 2 words, turn around. I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, expecting to see the guy in the Raiders jacket standing in my bedroom. My wife says I should see someone about it, maybe get some therapy. But what would I say? How do you explain the unexplainable? I've researched similar experiences online. Some people call them guardian angels. Others say it's a survival mechanism in the brain. Neither explanation feels right to me. Whatever or whoever saved me that night knew things I couldn't possibly have known. It showed me my death before it happened and gave me the chance to prevent it. The hardest part isn't the nightmares or the paranoia that followed. It's not knowing why. Why me? Why then? Has this happened to others? Will it happen again? Was I saved for a reason? Or was it random? These questions haunt me more than the memory of the voice itself. I've never posted this story anywhere before. Even writing it now makes my palms sweat. But I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. I need to know if I'm alone in this or if there are others who've heard the voice. Because 7 years later, I still look over my shoulder every time I walk through a parking lot. I still flinch when strangers approach me from behind. And I still wonder if someday I'll hear those words again. Turn around, and what I'll see when I do. Story 19. I've never told this story publicly before, but I need to get it off my chest. This happened when I was 16, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My stepdad, Rick, brought home this painting one evening after work. He works for a local moving company, and sometimes when people don't want certain items anymore, the movers get to take them. "Hey Ethan, got something for your room," he called out as he walked through the door. It was a canvas painting of Marilyn Monroe, but not one of those mass-produced ones you see everywhere. This was hand-painted with these super vibrant colors, lots of bright pinks, electric blues, and this weird yellow that seemed to glow under certain light. The artist had signed it in the corner, but the signature was this weird scribble I couldn't make out. Mom took one look at it and her face just changed. I can't really explain it. She didn't say anything negative, but I could tell she didn't like it. "You don't want it?" I asked her. She shook her head. "No, it's fine. If you like it, you can have it in your room." Rick seemed confused by her reaction too, but he just shrugged it off. Thought it looked cool. The family was throwing out a bunch of stuff. The guy said his uncle painted it or something. I was stoked. My room was pretty bare, just band posters and some sports trophies, so having actual artwork felt grown up. I hung it above my bed that same night. It looked awesome against my dark blue walls. Our house in Pinehurst is this single-story ranch style with a partially finished basement. My parents had started renovating the basement but never finished it, just painted the brick walls this bright orange color that was super popular in the 70s and left the concrete floors as they were. We mostly used it for storage and laundry. My room was directly above part of the basement. That first night with the painting, I fell asleep looking at Marilyn's face. Then the nightmare hit. I dreamed I was lying in my bed, but something felt wrong. The air was thick, almost impossible to breathe. My chest felt compressed, like someone was sitting on it. In the dream, I realized my bed was slowly sinking through the floor. The wood just gave way, and I was descending into the basement, mattress and all. I couldn't move or scream. All I could do was watch as my ceiling got farther away and the darkness of the basement surrounded me. When my bed finally hit the basement floor, I could move again. I jumped up, desperate to find the stairs, But the basement in my dream wasn't our basement. It was endless, pitch black except for thin strips of light coming from somewhere above. And I knew, in that bone-deep way you just know things in dreams, that something was in there with me. Something was hunting me. I ran, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete. My breath came in short, painful gasps. Whatever was chasing me was getting closer. I glanced back and saw it, small, black, moving in this jerky way that wasn't quite human. I only caught a glimpse before I woke up gasping for breath, my t-shirt soaked with sweat. It took me almost an hour to calm down enough to check the time, 3:15 in the morning. I turned on all my lights and stayed awake until sunrise. The next day I was exhausted but wrote it off as just a random nightmare. I mean, everyone has bad dreams, right? But that night, it happened again. Different dream, same terror. This time I was trapped in my room, but the walls were covered in these weird symbols that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Every time I tried to leave, my door would lead to another version of my room, slightly distorted. In each version, the painting of Marilyn looked more and more wrong, her smile stretching too wide, her eyes completely black. I woke up the same way, struggling to breathe, heart pounding so hard I thought I was having a heart attack. The third night was the worst. In that dream, I was back in the basement again, but this time I could see better. The orange brick walls were pulsing like they were alive. I tried to reach the stairs, but they kept moving, and then I saw them. Dozens of small black creatures crawling on the walls, floor and ceiling. They had too many legs and these weird glowing eyes. One dropped onto my shoulder and I felt this burning sensation where it touched me. I woke up screaming that time. My mom rushed in, freaking out. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" She was in her robe, hair all messed up. "Bad dream," I managed to say between breaths. "Really bad dream." She sat on the edge of my bed and rubbed my back like she used to when I was little. "That's the third night in a row you've had nightmares. I can hear you thrashing around." I hadn't realized she knew about the other nights. As I calmed down, I found myself staring at the painting. Marilyn's eyes seemed to follow me. The colors that had seemed so cool before now looked garish and wrong. "It's that damn painting, isn't it?" Mom said, following my gaze. I was surprised she'd made the connection. I don't know, maybe. I started having these dreams the night after we hung it up. "I had a bad feeling about it the minute Rick brought it in," she admitted. "Something just felt off about it." We talked for a bit longer, and I tried to convince myself it was just coincidence. Paintings don't cause nightmares. That's stupid, right? But the feeling wouldn't go away. "Let's test it," I suggested. "What if we move the painting to your room tonight, just to see what happens?" Mom hesitated, but then nodded. "Okay, one night. But if I wake up screaming, that thing is out of here." We took the painting off my wall and placed it in their bedroom, leaning against the wall closest to Mom's side of the bed. Rick thought we were being ridiculous, but went along with it. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in 3 days. No nightmares, no waking up gasping for breath, just normal sleep. I actually felt good the next morning until I saw Mom at breakfast. She looked terrible, pale with dark circles under her eyes. "You too?" I asked. She nodded, hands shaking as she poured her coffee. "I had this dream about kittens. Sounds nice, right? But they were sick, covered in flies. They were crying, but the sound they made, it wasn't like any cat I've ever heard, and I couldn't help them. I just had to watch them suffer. The whole time I felt this overwhelming dread, like something horrible was about to happen." Rick came in and took one look at Mom. "Jesus, Karen, you look awful." "Thanks," she said sarcastically. "I had nightmares all night, just like Ethan's been having." Rick looked between us, finally seeming to take it seriously. "Because of the painting. I don't know how to explain it," Mom said, "but yes, I think so. That day while I was at school, Mom took the painting out of the house. She didn't tell me where she put it at first. When I got home, it was gone, and Mom seemed more like herself." "Where'd it go?" I asked. "Somewhere it can't bother anyone anymore." was all she said. That night, we both slept fine. No nightmares, no waking up in terror. The next night was the same. Whatever connection that painting had to our dreams, it was broken. It wasn't until years later that Mom finally told me what she did with it. We were helping Rick clean out the garage, and somehow the topic came up. I drove it to that fancy neighborhood on the other side of town, she admitted. I was going to donate it to the thrift store, but when I got there, I couldn't do it. The thought of someone else buying it, hanging it in their home, I just couldn't pass that thing on to another person. So what did you do? I asked. I left it at the end of someone's driveway during garbage day. Let the trash collectors deal with it. Rick laughed. You drove 30 minutes to throw something in someone else's trash? Mom didn't laugh. I didn't want it anywhere near our house, and I didn't want anyone we know finding it either. It's been 12 years since then. I'm 28 now, with my own place. I still think about that painting sometimes. I've never experienced anything like those nightmares since. They felt so real, so physical. The terror was unlike anything I've ever felt, before or since. I've researched similar experiences online. Some people say certain objects can hold negative energy, or even entities. Others say it's all psychological, our minds playing tricks on us. I don't know what to believe. All I know is that I still can't look at images of Marilyn Monroe without feeling uneasy. And sometimes when I visit my parents and have to go down to that orange-walled basement for something, I find myself rushing back up the stairs, unable to shake the feeling that something small and black might be skittering just at the edge of my vision. Story 20. I still can't bring myself to visit my parents' apartment anymore. It's been almost 15 years since I spent the night in that room, and I've made every excuse in the book to avoid staying there. Christmas, sorry, my roommate needs me to watch her cat. Thanksgiving, I've got a paper due right after break. Dad's birthday, I'll drive up for the day but need to get back for an early class. They think I'm being dramatic. Maybe I am, but they didn't see what I saw in that room. This happened back in the fall of 1992 when I was a sophomore at LSU. My dad had just gotten a promotion at the paper mill outside of Baton Rouge, where he'd been working for about 3 years. We weren't originally from Louisiana. We moved there from Ohio when I was in high school after Dad lost his job at the factory back home. The promotion meant we could finally afford a better place to live. Our first apartment in Louisiana was this tiny one-bedroom where I had to sleep on a pull-out couch in the living room all through high school. Now that I was in college with a dorm room, my parents were excited to find a 2-bedroom place where I could have my own room when I visited. The apartment they found was in this old converted house about 20 minutes from campus. It had these high ceilings and creaky wooden floors, typical old Louisiana building with character, as the landlord put it. My parents were thrilled because it was significantly bigger than our old place and still within their budget. What they didn't tell me until I came home for fall break was why they got such a good deal on it. The previous tenant had died in the apartment. Not just died, he was found decomposing in a room he had secretly built within the apartment. The guy's name was Jack Foster. He'd worked at the same paper mill where my dad now worked, and apparently he had constructed this hidden room without the landlord's knowledge. The room was behind what looked like a regular closet in the master bedroom. You pushed on the back wall of the closet and it opened into this small room, maybe 8 by 10 feet. According to what my dad heard at work, Jack had always been a bit odd, kept to himself, barely spoke to anyone, but was reliable enough that nobody really questioned him. Then, one day in the summer of '78, Jack didn't show up for his shift. He missed the next day too, and the next. After 5 days, the neighbors downstairs started complaining about a smell. When the landlord finally checked the apartment, they found Jack's body in his secret room. Nobody knew why he built the room or what he used it for. There was nothing particularly suspicious found inside, just a chair, a small table, and some books. The medical examiner determined he'd died of a heart attack. He'd been dead for nearly 5 days before they found him. My dad actually got Jack's old job at the mill, and now, 14 years later, we were living in his apartment. When my mom showed me around that first day I came home for break, she was so proud of what they'd done with the place. She'd redecorated everything, painted the walls a cheery yellow, hung new curtains. And the best part, she told me, is you have your own room now when you visit. That's when she showed me the guest room, Jack's hidden room. They'd removed the false wall in the closet and turned it into a proper doorway. My mom had furnished it with a twin bed, a small dresser, and a nightstand with a lamp. She'd even hung some of my old artwork from high school on the walls. She was so excited about it, I couldn't tell her how creeped out I was, knowing I'd be sleeping in a room where someone had died and decomposed. "It's a little stuffy in here," I said, trying not to wrinkle my nose. There was a faint smell that lingered despite the fresh paint and new furniture. Not exactly rotting, more like old paper and something metallic. "I know," Mom sighed. "We've tried everything. Air fresheners, leaving the windows open. I think it's just because this room doesn't have its own window. The air doesn't circulate well." I told myself I was being ridiculous. It had been 14 years. There was nothing left of Jack Foster in that room, except maybe some lingering molecules in the floorboards. I could handle a weekend. The first night was uneventful. I was exhausted from midterms and fell asleep almost immediately. The second night is when things started to get strange. I asked my parents if I could leave the door to my room open. The bathroom was across the hall, and I didn't want to fumble for the doorknob in the dark if I needed to get up during the night. They said that was fine. I went to bed around 11, reading for a while before turning off the lamp. I remember checking that the door was still open before I turned over to go to sleep. I must have dozed off pretty quickly. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, needing to use the bathroom. The room was completely dark, darker than it should have been with the door open. I realized the door was closed. I figured maybe my dad had closed it when he went to bed, thinking I was asleep. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and walked toward where I knew the door was. As I got closer, I could make out the faint outline of the doorknob in the darkness. That's when I saw it moving. The doorknob was turning slowly, back and forth, like someone on the other side was trying to open it very quietly. At first, I thought it must be one of my parents checking on me, but something about the movement seemed wrong, too slow, too deliberate. I stood frozen a few feet from the door, watching the knob rotate slightly to the right, then back to the left, over and over. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but I couldn't make my voice work. After what felt like forever but was probably only 30 seconds, I lunged forward and grabbed the doorknob, yanking the door open. There was nothing there. The hallway was empty and dark, with just a sliver of light coming from under my parents' door across the hall. I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening. The house was completely silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creaking of the old floorboards settling. I told myself it was just an old house making old house noises. Maybe the doorknob was loose. Maybe I'd been half asleep and imagined the whole thing. I used the bathroom and went back to bed, leaving the door wide open this time. I didn't sleep much for the rest of the night. The next morning, I didn't mention anything to my parents. I didn't want them to think I was being childish. And honestly, in the daylight, it seemed silly to be scared of a doorknob. The third night is when it happened. I was exhausted from not sleeping well the night before, so I went to bed early, around 10. Again, I left the door open. I remember checking twice before I turned off the light. I fell into a deep sleep almost immediately, and then I started dreaming. In the dream, I was lying in the same bed, in the same room, but I knew I was dreaming because the colors were all wrong. Everything had a greenish tint, like looking through murky water. I couldn't move my body, could only look around with my eyes. I had the overwhelming sense that someone was in the room with me, not just nearby, directly above me. I forced my eyes to look up, toward the ceiling. There was a man clinging to the ceiling like a spider, looking down at me. His body was pressed flat against the ceiling, arms and legs splayed out at unnatural angles. He wore a red and black flannel shirt and denim overalls stained with what looked like oil or grease. On his feet were these distinctive work boots with steel toes, the kind my dad wore to the mill, but it was his face that made me want to scream. His skin was a mottled grayish blue, bloated and shiny. His eyes were bulging out of their sockets, bloodshot and yellow around the irises, and he was smiling down at me with blackened teeth, his head tilted at an impossible angle. I tried to scream but couldn't make a sound. I tried to move but was completely paralyzed. All I could do was stare up at him as he stared down at me. Then he began to move. Slowly, his head started rotating, turning further and further until it was completely upside down, his bulging eyes still fixed on mine. His mouth opened wider than any human mouth should be able to, and black liquid began dripping from it onto the bed beside me. That's when I finally managed to wake myself up, gasping and drenched in sweat. I reached for the lamp and knocked it off the nightstand in my panic. When I finally got it turned on, the room was empty. No one on the ceiling, no black liquid on the bed. But the door was closed again. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat up with the light on until morning, my back pressed against the headboard, staring at the door. At breakfast, my mom noticed how terrible I looked. "Are you feeling okay, honey? You look like you didn't sleep at all." I almost didn't tell them, but the image of that man on the ceiling was so vivid, so terrifying, that I had to talk about it. "I had a really bad nightmare," I said, pushing my eggs around on my plate. "There was a man in my room on the ceiling. He was watching me." My dad looked up from his newspaper. "What did he look like?" I described him. The flannel shirt, the overalls, the distinctive work boots, the bloated face and bulging eyes. As I spoke, I noticed my parents exchanging glances. "What?" I asked. My dad cleared his throat. That sounds a lot like what Jack Foster used to wear to work every day, according to the guys at the mill who knew him." A chill ran through me. How would I know that? I've never seen a picture of him. "It's probably just a coincidence," my mom said quickly, but her voice sounded strained. Later that day, when my mom went grocery shopping, I asked my dad more about Jack Foster. He hesitated, but finally told me that several people at the mill had stories about Jack, how he would sometimes talk to himself or stare at people for uncomfortably long periods, how he once told a co-worker that he needed a special room where they couldn't find him. "Who are they?" I asked. My dad shook his head. "No one knows. Jack never explained." I went back to school the next day, cutting my visit short. I told my parents I had a study group I'd forgotten about. They didn't question it, but I think they knew. I never stayed in that room again. When I visited, I slept on the couch or made excuses to go back to my dorm. A year later, my parents moved to a different apartment, and I never asked why. To this day, I don't know if what I experienced was some kind of sleep paralysis brought on by knowing the room's history, or if something of Jack Foster really did linger in that space he built. All I know is that the smell never left that room, and neither did the feeling of being watched from above. Story 21. I still can't sleep at night sometimes. It's been nearly 20 years since that night at the Sinclair house, but the memories are as fresh as if it happened yesterday. I've never shared this story online before, barely even told it to anyone face to face, but maybe writing it down will help me process what happened. I grew up in Pine Hollow, this tiny speck of a town nestled in the Appalachians, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody's business, where the local diner serves the same specials every week, and where kids have to make their own fun because there's not much else to do. I was 16 in 2004, that summer when everything changed for me. From as far back as I can remember, I'd always felt weirdly connected to the mountains and forests around our town, like they were speaking to me somehow. My mom used to say I was an old soul, whatever that means. I just knew I felt at home among the trees, the mist that rolled through the valleys, and the winding dirt paths that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. One evening in early June, I was hanging out with my friends at our usual spot, this little clearing by Harper Creek where we'd built a makeshift fire pit. Jake was telling some stupid joke while Emily rolled her eyes, and Charlie was messing with his new digital camera, a big deal back then. That's when Jake mentioned the Sinclair house. "You guys ever been up there?" he asked, poking the fire with a stick. My cousin dared his friend to spend the night, and the guy came running out after like 20 minutes, totally freaking out. I'd heard whispers about the place my whole life. The Sinclair house sat on the outskirts of town, up a winding dirt road that nobody really had a reason to drive on anymore. The story went that the Sinclairs had lived there for generations until there was this terrible fire sometime in the early 90s. The parents died, and their son, Tommy, I think his name was, survived, but got badly burned. After that, the kid disappeared, probably went to live with relatives, and the house was just left there to rot. "We should check it out," Charlie said, his eyes lighting up at the thought of a new adventure to capture on his camera. Emily shook her head immediately. "No way. That place is probably falling apart. We could get tetanus or something." "Or we could see a ghost," Jake teased, making spooky noises until Emily shoved him. I stayed quiet, but something about the idea pulled at me. I'd always been curious about the house, had seen it from a distance when my dad would drive us past that road. It sat there like a wound in the landscape, dark and brooding against the lush green hills. "What do you think, Mason?" Charlie asked me. "I think we should do it," I said, surprising even myself. "This Saturday, after dark." And that was that. We made our plans, swore each other to secrecy because our parents would absolutely kill us if they knew, and agreed to tell everyone we were camping at the creek. Saturday came and I spent the whole day with this knot in my stomach. Not exactly fear, more like anticipation mixed with something else I couldn't name. We met up around 8:30, waited until it was properly dark, then headed out with our flashlights, a couple of snacks, and Charlie's camera. The walk took almost an hour. The moon was nearly full that night, casting everything in this eerie blue-white light. The trees threw long shadows across the dirt road, and the usual nighttime forest sounds, crickets, frogs, the occasional hoot of an owl, seemed muted somehow, like the woods were holding their breath. When we finally reached the turnoff to the Sinclair property, we paused. The old mailbox was still there, hanging crooked from its post, the name Sinclair barely visible through years of rust and grime. "Last chance to back out," Jake said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. Nobody spoke for a second. Then Emily, who'd been the most reluctant, stepped forward. "We came all this way. Let's just get it over with." The driveway was long and overgrown, more like a tunnel through the trees than a road. Our flashlight beams bounced off the encroaching branches, creating shifting patterns that made me jumpy. After what felt like forever, the house appeared. It was bigger than I'd imagined, 2 stories with a wide front porch and what looked like an attic window at the very top. In the moonlight, I could make out peeling paint and boarded-up windows. The roof had partially collapsed on one side, and ivy climbed the walls like it was trying to pull the whole structure back into the earth. "Holy shit," Charlie whispered, already snapping pictures. We stood there for a minute, just staring. Despite the warm June night, I felt cold looking at that house. Not the kind of cold you feel on your skin, but deeper, like it was seeping into my bones. "Let's go," I said, taking the first step toward the porch. The others followed, our shoes crunching on the gravel and dead leaves. The porch steps creaked under our weight, and I half expected them to give way, but they held. The front door was slightly ajar, not locked or boarded up like I'd expected. Jake pushed it open with an exaggerated ladies first gesture that nobody laughed at. Inside, the air was thick and stale, heavy with the smell of damp wood, mold, and something else, something acrid that burned the back of my throat. Burnt plastic maybe, or old chemicals. Whatever it was, it made my eyes water. Our flashlights revealed a large living room with furniture still in place, a sagging couch, a couple of armchairs, and a coffee table covered in dust and debris from the ceiling. Picture frames hung crooked on the walls, and when I stepped closer to look at one, I saw a family, a man, a woman, and a boy of maybe 9 or 10, all smiling at the camera. The Sinclairs, I murmured, wiping dust from the glass with my thumb. The boy, Tommy, had a gap-toothed grin and a baseball cap turned backward on his head. Just a normal kid. Something in my chest tightened. "Check this out," Emily called from across the room. She was standing by a bookcase holding what looked like a school yearbook. "It's from 1991. I think this is him." She pointed to a class photo, a boy with the same gap-toothed smile from the family picture. While they looked through the yearbook, I wandered deeper into the house. The kitchen was a disaster, cabinets hanging open, dishes still in the sink, all covered in a thick layer of dust. It was like everyone had just vanished in the middle of their daily lives. But what really got to me were the signs of the fire. One wall of the kitchen was black with soot, and the ceiling above it was gone in places, showing the charred beams. I could see now that the fire must have started here and spread upward. I rejoined the others, who had moved into what must have been a study or den. Charlie was photographing everything, the flash creating stark, jarring images in the darkness. Jake was rifling through a desk drawer, pulling out papers and old photographs. "Dude, don't mess with their stuff," I said. "What? You think they're coming back for it?" He shot back, but he stopped anyway. We decided to check upstairs next. The staircase groaned with each step, and I kept one hand on the wall for balance. The upper floor was a long hallway with 4 doors leading off it. The first was a bathroom, relatively untouched by the fire but gross with mold and water damage. The second and third were bedrooms, one clearly the master, with a king-sized bed still made up with faded floral sheets, and another that must have been a guest room. The fourth door was Tommy's room. I knew it immediately. The walls were a faded blue, covered in posters of baseball players and bands from the early 90s. A twin bed sat against one wall, action figures lined a shelf, and a desk held schoolbooks and notebooks, all preserved like some kind of time capsule. This room had been spared the worst of the fire, though water damage had warped the floorboards and caused part of the ceiling to sag. "Poor kid," Emily said softly, picking up a teddy bear from the bed. "Imagine losing everything like that." We were all quiet for a moment. Then Jake, probably trying to lighten the mood, said, "Let's check out the basement. That's where the ghosts always hang out in movies." The basement door was off the kitchen. It opened to reveal a set of narrow wooden stairs descending into total darkness. Our flashlights barely penetrated the blackness down there. "I'll go first," I volunteered, not wanting to look scared in front of my friends. The basement was cold and damp with concrete floors and stone walls. It was mostly empty except for some shelves holding tools and old paint cans, a broken washing machine, and, weirdly, a rusty children's bicycle leaning against the far wall. "That must have been Tommy's," I said, walking over to it. The bike was small, meant for a kid of 8 or 9, with peeling red paint and training wheels. I reached out to touch the handlebar, and that's when I heard it. A whisper, soft at first, so faint I thought I'd imagined it, but then it came again, slightly louder. Not words exactly, more like the sound of someone trying to speak through water or static. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, turning to look at my friends. They shook their heads, looking confused. I was about to say something else when there was a loud crash from upstairs, like something heavy had fallen. We all jumped, and Emily let out a small scream. "What was that?" she hissed. "Probably just something falling. These old houses settle," Charlie said, but he didn't sound convinced. We headed back up the basement stairs, our flashlights making our shadows dance grotesquely on the walls. When we reached the kitchen, we realized what had made the noise. The front door, which we'd left ajar, had slammed shut. "Must have been the wind," Jake said, but I knew there had been no wind that night. The air outside had been completely still. As we moved back through the living room toward the front door, I saw something from the corner of my eye, a shadow moving across the hallway. Not one of our shadows cast by the flashlights, but something else, something darker and more substantial. "Did you see that?" I asked, grabbing Emily's arm. "See what?" she said, looking scared now. There was someone or something in the hallway. Jake shined his flashlight down the hall, but there was nothing there. You're freaking yourself out, man. But I knew what I'd seen, and as we stood there, the whispers started again, louder this time, more distinct, not coming from any particular direction, but seeming to echo through the entire house. Help us! Help us! The voices were childlike, but wrong somehow, distorted and hollow, a chorus of them, overlapping, growing louder with each repetition. "Tell me you hear that," I said, my voice shaking. From their faces I could tell they did. Emily's eyes were wide with fear, and even Jake looked pale. "We need to go now," Charlie said, already backing toward the front door. The door wouldn't open. Jake pushed harder, then started throwing his shoulder against it, but it was like it was sealed shut. "The back door," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. We hurried through the kitchen to the back of the house, where a door led out to what had once been a patio. This door opened easily, too easily, swinging wide as if pushed from the other side. We didn't hesitate. We burst through the door and ran across the overgrown yard, not stopping until we reached the edge of the property where it met the tree line. There, we collapsed on the grass, gasping for breath, our flashlight beams bouncing crazily through the darkness. "What the hell was that?" Jake panted. Nobody had an answer. We sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. When I looked back at the house, I swear I saw a figure standing in an upstairs window, small, like a child, but wrong somehow, its proportions distorted. Then the moonlight shifted, and it was gone. We walked back to town in almost complete silence, jumping at every sound, staying close together. When we reached the point where we had to split up to go to our separate homes, we made a pact not to tell anyone what happened, who would believe us anyway. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the house, about Tommy. I went to the local library and looked through old newspaper archives. I found the story of the fire, June 3rd, 1992. The article confirmed what I'd heard. Both parents, Robert and Margaret Sinclair, died in the blaze. Their son, Thomas, aged 10, survived, but with severe burns to over 30% of his body. The article mentioned he'd been taken in by an aunt who lived in Ohio. There was a quote from a neighbor saying how tragic it was, how Tommy had been such a bright, friendly kid, how he'd never be the same. I kept digging and found a follow-up story from a few months later. Tommy had died in the hospital from complications related to his injuries. He never made it to Ohio. That hit me hard. The poor kid hadn't survived after all, and somehow I felt like I'd known that all along. I've thought about that night a lot over the years, about the whispers asking for help, about the shadow I saw moving through the hallway, about the figure in the window. Was it Tommy? Was he trapped there somehow, haunting the place where his life had been destroyed? Or was it something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with the Sinclairs? I never went back to the house. None of us did, but sometimes when I'm back in Pine Hollow visiting my parents, I feel this pull toward that dirt road, like something's calling me back. I resist it, but sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be free of that night, of what we experienced, of the voice that asked for our help and the shadow that watched us from the darkness. Story 22. I've never shared this with anyone outside my immediate family. Even now, typing this makes my hands shake a little. I guess I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I was 11 when I first realized there might be things in this world that can't be explained. It was summer in upstate New York, and I was beyond excited because my friend Madeline had invited me to stay at her family's home for the weekend. When my mom dropped me off, I was stunned. Their place wasn't just a house. It was this massive property with several buildings spread out across what felt like acres of woods. Madeline called it the compound, which sounded weird to me, but apparently that's what her family had always called it. The main house was this old Victorian thing with more rooms than I could count. It had belonged to Madeline's great-grandparents originally, and different branches of their family had built additional houses on the property over the years. The whole setup was beautiful but isolated. The nearest neighbor was like half a mile away, and the closest town was a 15-minute drive. That first day was awesome. We went swimming in their pond, played with Madeline's cousins who lived in one of the other houses, and had this amazing dinner where everyone sat at this massive table that could probably seat 20 people. Madeline's mom had made homemade pizza, and her dad was telling these funny stories about when he was a kid there. It felt so warm and normal. But then night came. Madeline's older brother Jake suggested we have a bonfire. Their parents agreed, and soon all the kids, Madeline, me, Jake, and 3 cousins, were sitting around this huge fire pit behind the main house. The adults were there too, but they were sitting farther back on the porch, drinking wine and talking among themselves. It was so dark out there. Like, not regular dark, the kind of dark you only get when you're really far from city lights. The stars were incredible, but when you looked away from the fire, you couldn't see much beyond its circle of light. Jake started telling ghost stories. He was 14 and thought he was so cool. Most of them were the usual campfire stuff. Escaped mental patients with hooks for hands, that kind of thing. But then he started telling us about the Watcher. The Watcher has been in this house since before Great-Grandpa bought it, Jake said, his voice getting lower. Sometimes, late at night, you can see him in the windows. He's looking for something he lost a long time ago. Madeline's dad yelled from the porch, "Jake, that's enough of that nonsense." But the damage was done. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I kept glancing up at the dark windows of the house behind us. That's when I saw it. There was a face. In the window of what I later found out was a spare bedroom on the 3rd floor. It wasn't clear, more like a pale oval against the darkness, but I swear it was there, watching us. "Look!" I blurted out, pointing up at the window. "There's someone up there." Everyone turned to look. The adults stood up. "Where, honey?" Madeline's mom asked, squinting up at the house. "3rd floor, in that window on the right," I said, still pointing. Madeline's dad went inside to check while we all stared at the window. The face, or whatever it was, had disappeared the moment I pointed at it. After a few minutes, he came back out. "Nothing there," he said. "All the upstairs rooms are empty. Must have been a reflection from the fire." I could feel everyone looking at me. Jake snickered. "Olivia got scared by my story," he teased. "I really saw something," I insisted, but I could tell no one believed me. Madeline's mom suggested we should all head inside for ice cream, and the subject was dropped. That night, Madeline and I were sharing her room on the 2nd floor. I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow had me wide awake. Around midnight, Madeline rolled over and whispered, "Olivia, you still up?" "Yeah," I whispered back. "I saw it too," she said so quietly I almost missed it. My blood went cold. "You did?" She nodded in the darkness. I didn't say anything because Jake would have made fun of me, and Mom and Dad always say it's just our imagination, but I've seen it before. "What is it?" I asked, pulling the covers up to my chin. "I don't know, but sometimes I hear footsteps in the hallway at night when everyone's asleep, and once I woke up and saw someone standing at the foot of my bed. When I turned on the light, no one was there. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face in the window. The next morning, I called my mom and made up an excuse about not feeling well. She came to pick me up early, and I never stayed overnight at Madeline's again. We stayed friends through middle school, but whenever she invited me over, I'd only go during daylight hours. I never told her the real reason why. Eventually, her family moved away when her dad got a job in another state, and we lost touch. That was my first experience with something I couldn't explain, but sadly, not my last. Fast forward to Valentine's Day 2014. I was 17, a junior in high school. The day started normally enough. My mom had left for work early, and my stepdad Frank was still asleep when I headed to school. Frank wasn't feeling great. He had some health problems, including heart issues, but nothing seemed especially wrong that morning. First period was English with Mrs. Peterson. Since it was Valentine's Day, she thought it would be fun to do a word scramble using the phrase, "Happy Valentine's Day." She handed out sheets with the letters all jumbled up, and we had to make as many words as possible in 15 minutes. I started writing down the obvious ones: happy, day, Valentine, love. But then something weird happened. My brain kept forming other words, dark words that had nothing to do with Valentine's Day. Death, die, dead. I tried to push these thoughts away, but they kept coming back stronger. Every time I looked at the letters, those words jumped out at me. I wrote them down just to get them out of my head, then immediately scribbled them out. By third period, I had this overwhelming sense of dread. I felt like I needed to go home, like something was wrong. I even went to the nurse's office and asked if I could call my mom, but my temperature was normal, and the nurse thought I was just trying to skip class. The feeling got worse as the day went on. During lunch, I couldn't eat. My friend Ashley asked what was wrong, and I just said I felt off. I couldn't explain the sense of impending doom that was building inside me. By sixth period, my last class of the day, I was a mess. I kept checking my phone, expecting a call or text with bad news. Nothing came. When the final bell rang, I practically ran to my bus. As we approached my stop, I saw the ambulances, 2 of them, parked in front of my house, their lights flashing silently. My heart dropped into my stomach. I jumped off the bus and ran down the street. Our elderly neighbor, Mr. Wilson, was standing in his driveway. He stopped me before I could reach my house. "Olivia," he said, putting his hands on my shoulders. "Wait. Your grandfather is here. He's waiting for you inside my house." I found my grandpa sitting at Mr. Wilson's kitchen table, his face ashen. When he saw me, he stood up and hugged me tightly. "What happened?" I asked, but I already knew it was bad. "Something's happened with Frank," he said carefully. "The paramedics are with him now. Your mother called me from the ambulance. She wanted me to be here when you got home from school." "Is he okay?" I asked, my voice small. My grandfather's silence told me everything. Later, we learned that Frank had died in his sleep from congestive heart failure. My mom had called home during her lunch break, and when Frank didn't answer, she got worried and asked our neighbor to check on him. Mr. Wilson had a spare key, and he found Frank unresponsive in bed. The thing that still haunts me to this day is how I knew. Those words, death, die, dead, kept forming in my mind all day, like some part of me already understood what was happening at home while I sat in school doing a Valentine's Day word puzzle. Just like that face in the window at Madeline's house, there's no logical explanation for what happened. I've never told anyone about the words that came to me that day. What would I even say? Oh, I had a premonition my stepdad was going to die. People would think I was making it up or trying to make his death about me. But I know what I experienced, just like I know what I saw that night at the bonfire. There are things in this world that science can't explain, connections we don't understand. Sometimes I wonder if that figure I saw at Madeline's house was trying to warn me about something, or maybe these experiences aren't connected at all, and I'm just someone who's had the misfortune of brushing up against the unexplainable more than once. All I know is that I pay attention to those feelings now. When something feels wrong, when words or images come into my mind that don't make sense, I listen, because twice now the unexplainable has touched my life, and I can't help but wonder when it might happen again.